Hello, everyone. Welcome to Common's second annual Earth Summit. You know, my name is Kestrel. I host and produce a podcast called Conscious Chatter. Happy Earth Day. It's so amazing to have all of these incredible people here today and so many really, really powerful panelists that we're going to hear from. As somebody who was able to attend last year's event in Venice, the first Earth Summit, I'm so excited to be back because I feel like Commons has this really unique ability to bring together people and have a really holistic lens and intersectional approach to discussion. So, really stoked to be here. This year's theme is, what does it mean to live within Earth's means? I feel like one thing that we often forget is that we, as humans, are also a very integral part of nature. It's not this separate thing that, we need to save or protect, like we are part of that. So one of the things we want to think about is, how can we live in alignment with the environment around us, the ecosystems that we are all very much a part of? So this question we're going to hear kind of woven throughout several of our discussions today. If you look at your program, there are a list of all of the incredible panels that we have on tap, very diverse discussions that I cannot wait to hear. And later on, after all of this meaningful conversation, we're going to have a really tasty, fully plant-based dinner provided by Good Eggs. So with all of this very exciting context in mind, I want to now pass the mic to the CEO and founder of Commons, Sanchali Pal, who is going to give you a little basics on what Commons is all about and how you can interact with their app.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Earth Day. Thanks for celebrating. Today, perhaps more than any Earth Day before, I think it's really important that we all recommit to how beautiful life on Earth is and how much we want to live it. For a lot of people, when they think about environmentalism, they might think about a planet in the distance, polar bears. For me, that's not it. For me, it's much more personal. I think about a breath of fresh air, about my daughter giggling. I think about a table full of food shared with friends and family, the moments of celebration with family and friends that make life on Earth worth living. So I wanted to invite everyone to start by just taking a moment to ask you to think for yourself, what is it about life on Earth that you love so much? Think about maybe one thing that makes life on Earth worth living for you. Keep that in your mind. I started Commons to make the sustainable choice, the easy choice, and the better choice. So with the app, you can download it in the App Store or the Play Store. It's free. You can find brands that actually care and quality products that are better for you and for the planet. You can earn rewards when you make sustainable choices, and then you can redeem those rewards for more sustainable purchases. Moreover, you can join a community of people, like all of the people here today and on our live stream, thanks for joining, who are demanding a more sustainable life with their daily choices. So encourage you to download the app also this month for Earth Month. If you join the app and then join the Vote with Your Dollars challenge, you can earn $10 in rewards right now. So get started on a good note. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you really enjoy the panels today. And if you take pictures or videos, please tag us at Commons Earth on Instagram. Have fun.
All right, thank you so much, Sanchali. All right, let's dive in and get started. Our first panel is focused on building community resilience. Of all the times in the world, I feel like this panel is overwhelmingly needed right now. Climate disasters continue to happen around us all across the world. Governments are failing us. It is a time where we really need to come together. So We're going to explore how communities are creating models to preserve a safer future and how these models can really inspire lower impact ways of living. So I want to welcome to our stage the moderator for this panel, Yessenia Funes, who is an environmental journalist and the editor-at-large of the Atmos. Come on up. I'll pass it to you. Also joining Yessenia, we have Chris Jordan, a researcher and conservationist at Rewild. We have climate storyteller and creator Lauren Bash. I already almost did that too. We have Evelyn Escobar, the founder of Hike Club, a nonprofit reimagining an equitable and inclusive outdoors. And we have Fabiana Rodriguez, climate artist and cultural strategist. All right, Yessenia, I cannot wait to sit down and learn.
Thank you so much, Kestrel, and thank you everyone for being here. Happy Earth Day. This is a much needed Earth Day today. We're here to talk today about community resilience. We're in California, where Los Angeles is still reeling from the devastating impacts of the wildfires in January, Altadena, Pasadena. We're seeing in the Midwest tornadoes and floods, mudslides, just killing dozens earlier this month. Lauren, I know that you were on the ground in LA after the fires. We saw mutual aid networks take shape. Talk to me about what you saw on the ground. What kind of examples of resilience did you see?
Who are the other Angelinos in the crowd? I feel like we actually have like a heck yeah, okay.
Woo!
Yay, LA. I'm from LA. I will die in LA. That's what I always tell people. Not like in a dark way. Just like I will live a long, beautiful life and never live anywhere else in LA. But so naturally, I think being from a place, there's this response when crisis happens. You're like, this is all that matters. I have to drop everything and help. And so I'd seen like amazing mutual aid organizations in LA that have existed prior to the fires. And the beautiful thing was the response to it. Like, I don't know, it's a weird dichotomy of two things. Like, there was so much destruction and darkness and sadness and grief and anxiety amidst all of it, but there was so much support simultaneously. And it felt like the whole city came together and stepped up and did everything they could to help each other out. And so the mutual aid organizations, whether it be on Instagram or on their website or or even like Signal group chats, were saying, this is the need. Like the biggest one is Mutual Aid Los Angeles. It's an Instagram channel. They have a Signal chat. They said, this is the need. And what was really beautiful was they weren't necessarily reinventing the wheel. They were just connecting people exactly where they were at. And so that was the first thing I saw, was like everyone dropped everything, stepped up, and identified the need. But in that, I also saw organizations or communities of people with well-intended hearts trying to help, but perhaps reinventing the wheel. And so I think something we saw a lot in LA was these warehouses that would fill up with donations, and everyone with like the purest intent said, we're gonna be a donation collection center, come bring water, diapers, formula, clothes, like come drop it off here. But then they were missing the key component of the logistical part of how is this being distributed to families? Do you have the family's contact information, and what were their specific needs? And so then you had these warehouses or spaces filled up with donations with nowhere to go. And so I know we're talking about community resilience, but I think that was the key part that these mutual aid orgs that had existed prior to the fires offered, was that logistical part. And then the other thing I noticed was when you just say like, okay, I'm showing up, like I have no expectation, I'm showing up and I've got hands and time. And then you start identifying what you have that maybe you weren't aware of that was needed. So like one of the organizations is amazing, Pasadena Job Center, and they were doing not debris fire, but like a lot of the trees were falling down because it was 120 mile an hour wind. So these trees were blocking roads or had like smashed cars or were blocking traffic, things like that. So they said, we've got a workforce of people with chainsaws and rakes and shovels and everything. We're gonna mobilize our people to go out and clean up the community. And they said, we need volunteers. That's all we need is people who aren't scared of these tools, who have familiarity using these tools. We need people and we need rakes. And I was like, well, I've got like a group chat from Surfrider of people who are down to get dirty. And my mom runs a tool library and she's got rakes. So like, I got it. I can plug in and help. But had I not shown up and heard what the need was in the first place, I don't think I would have been aware. So those were the two beautiful things I saw, was like the mobilization that happens of people, and also the response of we take for granted what we have to offer until it's perhaps presented to you, or like you don't know what you have to offer until you're in that space.
Yeah, and it sounds like community relationships and connections are a big part of what helps those networks thrive. I'd love to hear from everyone else your thoughts on how do we scale up these models and sustain them beyond moments of disaster, beyond disaster relief. Whoever wants to start.
I can answer briefly, and I'll talk more about this later. But I think a key aspect of maintaining these between disasters and in preparation for disasters is making conscious investments in the social fabric of communities. This can be done in a number of ways, from the policy level in finding economic alternatives, development alternatives that can scale to lift communities out of poverty, to provide livelihoods for people, to cultural activities, investing in art, investing in community restoration of nature, but just valuing investments that are focused on community, building that sense of community and that collective commitment to protecting the community, the nature, and the people that are surrounding you.
I would also add that, the Pasadena workforce that was mobilized by immigrant laborers who are day laborers, and just I would encourage folks to join and be a part of movement organizations, especially that are run by some of the most vulnerable, because that's where you're seeing models of mutual aid that are very intersectional, considering that these were immigrant workers who are also being attacked by the administration. And so how we support each other can translate in so many different ways. And then I really love seeing what Sway did. The Sway, who is, I actually got this at one of their pop-up art sales. Sway is, they look at the circular economy and how to reduce fashion waste. But they're such a mission-oriented organization, and so thinking about, we all have economic power. How are we supporting institutions that are deeply invested in community and that have infrastructure to act? And then with artists, I really was happy that there was a response for artists, because so many artists lost studio, but also thinking about, the precariat workforces. Who are the artists, the workers, communities who are going to need another level of support, and how are we thinking about each other and being able to mobilize rapidly, because the reality is also our state infrastructures are not responding fast enough. And so we need to have our infrastructures and our networks activated, but they have to be cultivated year-round.
And one last thing I just want to add on top of this, because, a big saying that was going around as all of this was happening was community is always going to be mobilized before the city is, the state is, the federal government is. We saw with mutual aid networks, it's called Mask Block LA, and they have been distributing masks since COVID broke out, and they were getting pressure from the city to come and provide the masks that they've been collecting through donations, and they were daily moving tens of thousands of masks, and it's we should be on the proactive side of these things. By the time this hits, it's too late. And we now live in a time, obviously because of what's happening with the climate, where disasters are only going to get bigger and they're only going to continue. So we have to now see what we can do on every level of adding in these initiatives before we're in the initiative. And I think, a place like San Francisco, a place like Los Angeles, where there's a lot of things, everyone's always like, the big one's gonna come. And we're not prepared. We're not there yet. So this was just one of those really stark reminders that you need to get ready, because this is only gonna continue.
Yeah, and also what I'm hearing here is that disaster looks like many things, right? In LA, we saw these wildfires that were catastrophic. I'm also hearing, mentions of the Trump administration and the disaster that's unfolding right now at the federal level, the constitutional crisis we're in. Evelyn, I know that you started your organization during the first Trump administration. Tell us about the important role of community and the outdoors during periods like this. I know that Chris also hinted at the importance of protecting our ecosystems, restoring ecosystems, and your work brings folks into these ecosystems.
Absolutely. Well, our work centers Black, Indigenous, and other racialized women, trans, and gender nonconforming people. So we are providing the reconnection and a safe space to collectively heal in nature to the people who are being most impacted by the climate, by the Trump administration, and all of these other things. And so, it shouldn't be this way, but, I'm Black and Indigenous. Resiliency, I would not be alive today had my ancestors been like, guess that's it, It's been a fun ride. No, this has been generations and generations of resiliency for me to even be sitting here today. So that is unfortunately and fortunately in our coding. But with that said, with what's happening, it's this is not going to stop us. It's only going to provide more obstacles and more roadblocks. We have always shown up in the moment to secure and make sure that our communities are provided for, because at the end of the day, it's up to us. We got us. And we see this reflected so many times in so many ways. And we can't look to the federal government to save us. We can't look to the state. And honestly, we really have to look to our own community, because even in what's happening right now, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but what's happening with funding, especially organizations that were receiving federal funding, but on every level, you see organizations, I think I saw, I can't remember the name of the organization, but it's an organization that centers around immigration. And they said that they lost $4 million in federal funding this year. And so it's one of those things where, again, we know the impact that's happening. We know what people are experiencing because we are a part of those communities. And so not only do we need safe spaces to gather and to literally just breathe and connect with the earth because of what's happening, we also are coming together to support each other, and it's has to be a larger buy-in. It can't just be us. We need allies. We need people to invest in the work that we're doing so that we can scale our impact. Because at the end of the day, like I said, we're not going to stop, but we are limited by the resources that are available to us. And unfortunately, we do not get the large pool of these philanthropy dollars and, XYZ. There's so many statistics on it. I think Black women get less than 1% of, funding dollars that are available on the for-profit and nonprofit side. So, but also, who are the people who are heading up these social change initiatives and the impact work? So there's this really unfair division of how these resources are being broken up. And obviously this is by design, this is systemic, this is something that we've always faced. And so that's why in this moment I don't feel so panicked, because this unfortunately is the norm for us.
100%. And with the Trump administration's attack on so-called DEI, right, I think it's important to name that the people who are facing these impacts are communities of color, right? And unfortunately, given the US's sort of role globally, these impacts have effects beyond our borders. Chris, I know that you do a lot of work in Latin America, a lot of work with indigenous peoples, with Rewilds, and I know that folks over there are also feeling the disastrous impacts of climate crisis, also governmental issues, dictatorships are taking over everywhere. What can we in the US learn from these communities about resilience and community, and more importantly, how can we support them?
Yeah, thanks. I was reflecting on this question in the context of the crisis in Latin America's forest, in the Amazon, where every year now we lose approximately 1 million soccer fields of rainforest to animal agriculture, illegal mining, and other things. with fire seasons getting worse. And I was thinking about, I made a trip last November, I think, to visit with the Yanomami people who live along the border area between Venezuela and Brazil. And we went to the village of Watoriki, which is a very, very remote place. You go to Boa Vista in the state of Roraima, and you fly over maybe 180 kilometers of completely intact rainforest before you land in a remote outpost, a health outpost, and then walk 45 minutes to an hour to get to the village of Watoriki, a Yanomami village. When you do these sorts of trips and you show up in a village, there is always a big community meeting where you talk about why you're there, what your purpose is in being there, and then the community gives everyone a chance to speak about what the relevant issues are, what's happening in their community that's relevant for you and your objectives. And I was really blown away by this village, Watoriki. It's in the context of kind of a massive crisis of illegal mining, health issues, mercury poisoning. But they were talking about how in that village, they practice total resistance. They don't allow in any representatives from extractive industries. They don't allow in any missionaries or representatives from organized religion. They don't allow in any processed food into the village. They don't allow in any satellite dishes, televisions, anything. And it was a very happy, healthy village. And they know that their justification for this is if they open the door to any of those things, it's a slippery slope to losing their traditional culture, their traditions, and their way of life. And it really impressed on me that while this is amazing, that sort of commitment and that sort of collective resistance doesn't come without that strong social fabric that I was referring to before. And that social fabric doesn't just exist. I mean, it's not just there. It's something that's constantly reaffirmed, that's constantly built over and over again through collective practices. And you see this across all of the Amazon. I mean, if you look at places like Suriname, we were talking about this yesterday with the Afro-descendants Hamaka people. They create this sort of social fabric through things like their traditional art, their traditional woodworking, where they make these very elaborate designs in utilitarian items and wooden items. And the actual process of making the art is a community exercise of sharing knowledge across generations. People do it together in the same room and comment on one another's art. But then also the utilitarian items themselves are always given as gifts to particular family members or particular community members. So if you actually go into somebody's house and see their material possessions, each one of those things, a bench, a plate, a winnowing tray, a spoon, represents a particular individual from the community, so that their material possessions are a representation of that social fabric within their village. They also do things like consensus-based decision-making, where they all get together and debate a particular project or idea, break off into groups, come up with different proposals for the youth, the women, the men, and then come back and present those proposals and then negotiate between them until they come up with a shared proposal that they can all agree on and make a decision as a consensus to move forward as a community. And when you see this sort of scaled up across a place like the Amazon, it also then is very easy to scale it up for instances where national resistance is needed, when you need these territories, these communities to react to federal level policies or state level policies where they're all collectively defending their rights, that autonomy, that social fabric. So how we can support this, I think, at Rewild, we recognize the value of these processes and support them at different levels, from that community level to the projects and the community ideas or territorial ideas that come out of it. So one great example is, to wrap up, the Kayapó indigenous people in Brazil, who we've worked with for a long time. And we've supported different processes within the community, different processes for communicating the Kayapó culture globally, but then also their Forest Guard program, where they build on that social fabric to defend the borders of their territory. And their territory, it's around 10,000 people, but their Forest Guard program in their territory is around 25 million acres total. So it's 10,000 people working to defend an area that's the size of the state of Virginia, of intact ecosystems. But you can actually, built on this social fabric is a system of territorial defense that you can actually see from space the borders of their territory in satellite images. where the threats, soy encroaching, soy primarily for animal feed, illegal mining, it stops at the border of the Kayapo territory. And this is not because of government action or anything else. It's because of that social fabric. It's because of that community resistance. So I think, supporting these processes financially, elevating their voices, and recognizing the value of 10,000 people who are defending an area the size of the state of Virginia with forests that's critically important for all of us, for its biodiversity value, its carbon value, et cetera.
Yeah, it's incredibly inspiring, and I think an important reminder for us to always hold on to that fact of, indigenous peoples are a small minority globally, but they steward a majority of the world's biodiversity, and indigenous knowledge is so crucial to the work that they're doing across the Amazonia. And you shared some, I think, really beautiful details about the artwork that's being crafted. And Fabi, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the role of art. We can't survive disaster without art and culture and inspiration. How do you see your art advocacy supporting the communities you work in, especially the communities of color where there's often inadequate public funding for art in public schools? Yeah, talk to us a little bit about that crucial role of art.
Well, the power of art is that art can show us a way forward, and art is a light in times of darkness. Art can show us about a possibility even if it's not here. And in our political system, sometimes we're bound by what's politically feasible, but art and culture can take us to another place, and it speaks to our emotions. One thing about the Amazon, I would encourage everyone to check out Amazon Watch. They're here in the Bay Area. I'm on their board. And we support frontline defenders, women who are defending their territories, because the other very sad reality is that indigenous land protectors are being murdered at rates that we haven't seen before. And guess who's the largest buyer of Amazon crude oil? It's California. So we are directly responsible for the devastation in the Amazon because of our dependence on fossil fuels. So we have to be able to connect the dots. And I would say one of the things that I love, speaking on the power of art and culture, is that indigenous people talk about, in the Amazon especially, about reforesting our minds and how we have to be in a different relationship to nature and recognize that we are nature, and that these colonial systems have taught us that extractive economies is the norm, when in reality, extractivism is killing us all. So that is what art and culture offer us. And related to what you were talking about, one thing I've been using my art for is to talk about our fight to protect public lands. And I think that we all have to really, really understand what's happening with the federal government right now. The administration is opening up public lands for logging and extractivism, and the attempts to really dissolve and devastate our infrastructure, that the EPA, right, all of our social safety net is being threatened right now. But I'm very inspired by what's happening with the parks, because if you really think about it, colonization, like what happened in this country, the theft of land, the murder of indigenous people, the enslavement of Africans, the exploitation of the Chinese, the exploitation of Mexicans and Latinos, this country was built on extractivism, and all of our systems are so dependent on that. And the reason we even have national parks is because they were like the one areas that people said, okay, don't destroy that, right? It's why we have Muir Woods, it's all of that. So when you think about there's already limited access to nature, and that these places are going to be opened for logging, for extractivism, it's devastating. And how they're firing park workers and making it impossible for even park workers to take care of the local species. So I've been making a lot of art with the resistance rangers, which I would also encourage folks to look them up. Resistance rangers, they're basically rangers who are sharing all of the information about what's happening on the inside. And the art is about protecting nature, protecting public lands, standing with park workers. And who knew that park rangers and parks were going to be such a like thing that mobilizes people? Because when you go to the protest, it's like, whoa, there's everyone, like disabled people and elders. And so I think that art and culture is what can help bring us together and show us a vision for our future. Because right now we're really good at saying what we're against, but what are we for? What does our future look like? Because the right wing has a very clear narrative of where they want to take this country, right? What would we do? What does our future look like? And how do we translate that into culture so that people could really feel it in their heart?
Yeah, hearing you talk reminds me of that phrase, radical imagination. Yeah. It's just like, which pretty much talks about the importance of like imagining the world you want, to be radical, to think of the utopia. We need to be crafting those narratives. It's so important and something that I think a lot of my writing. So I really appreciate that, Favi. One final question for all of you, and I'd love for us to just go down if that's okay. What can each of us nurture in our own communities to make them more abundant and resilient? I'm always about systemic change, but we also need to like take care of ourselves.
Yeah, well, I think at Rewild we do this at multiple levels and on a personal level. I believe in this as well. But I think it's look to build unified visions with the people within your community rather than competing. I think we're constantly in a culture, even in the conservation world, where we see other organizations and there's an atmosphere of competition between us of ownership over projects or for competition for funding, et cetera. And I think to the extent to which we can bring groups of stakeholders together or community members together and build unified visions together so that we're all advancing in the same direction rather than having competition against people who are ultimately on the same team. I think it's a practice that we need to implement both personally and professionally, especially in fields, which I'm sure a lot of you are in fields that are very mission driven, but especially in those fields, kind of reduce the competition between our community members and build unified visions.
Yeah, I echo Chris. Something I've learned a lot of in the past couple of years is about coalition building with other organizations. So the organization I volunteer a lot of my time with is Surfrider Foundation, and while our focus is against offshore oil drilling, there's an amazing coalition in LA called Stand LA, and they stand against neighborhood drilling. And so we've been in coalition with them to close down oil drilling plants on land in adjacent to advocating against offshore oil drilling and suing the Trump administration for opening the continental shelf. So it's all the same work. And where a really cool project that I'm seeing kind of like interweave everything where citizens are getting involved or community members are getting involved is the Make Polluters Pay campaign, which is a piece of legislation that it's so simple, y'all. It's like big oil burning fossil fuels is causing the climate to heat up, which causes extreme weather events like fires. So big oil needs to pay for the mess. The simplest way that we relate it to is if there was an oil spill, we would say, hey, your oil rig leaked, you have to clean it up. But if emissions were like black clouds in the sky, we would say, hey, Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, or BP, Shell, you have to clean up your mess. Yes. So it's bringing together people. Last Wednesday, we delivered 110,000 signatures to City Hall in LA to say California is not taking this anymore. Big oil has to pay. And so there's these climate super funds that would fund environmental justice organizations, frontline communities who are in Altadena, in Pasadena, saying we cannot afford to rebuild. This money goes immediate to disaster relief, but also to actually like ecologically make our cities more resilient and mitigate a lot of the damages from climate change. So anyway, it's really empowering to see like the coalition building and how 110,000 people are using their voices to say, no, big oil has to pay. Vermont, it passed in Vermont, it passed in New York, and now it will pass in California. Yes. So, yeah.
I think, honestly, we tend to forget how powerful we each are individually. And I love that we touched on radical imagination because building High Club was literally me simply building the world that I wanted to exist in. And we have galvanized thousands of people across the nation to get outdoors and to mobilize with us, without us. And if we all committed to some form of inspired action, we would absolutely change the world. And so it's just that. If you feel really passionate about seeing immigrant communities thrive, there's an inspired action that you can take. If you want to see our public lands protected, there's an inspired action you can take. So I think it's asking yourself every single day, how can I take inspired action to support something that I really care about? You don't have to care about everything, but if you at least care about one thing and you commit to doing something to support that every single day, you will see a difference being made.
I would say to recognize that we are in a cultural war. We are in a narrative battle for our imagination, and we have to recognize the dominant narratives and think about how are we filling our hearts and minds with other narratives. So for example, there's a narrative in this country of scarcity, that there's not enough. That narrative is a lie. This is the richest country in the world. How are we tapping into the narrative of abundance and leading abundance lives? There's a narrative out there that your human value is related to your economic value, that as hard as you work defines you. Question that, right? The capitalism is killing us. It's killing our family bonds. How do we support a culture that values us as human beings and that rejects this notion that our human value is equal to our economic output? There is a narrative that it's a dangerous world out there. You need to get your guns. You need to lock up all those criminals. That's a lie. Who are the real criminals? The billionaires are the criminals. How are we actually rethinking who we're defining, what we're defining as danger, and really reimagining systems where we care for each other? There's a narrative out there that talks about immigrants being criminals. I mean, this is a huge narrative. It's literally, the challenge with these narratives is they get turned into policy, right? We're seeing the kinds of policies today against immigrants that are based in this lie. I mean, immigrants are not coming for your Medicaid. They're not stealing your jobs, right? And they're literally being targeted and scapegoated because of these ideas that somehow this border, which is, the earth doesn't have borders, right? These borders are artificial, they're based on economic power. How are we questioning this and saying, no, actually, how do we keep our immigrant communities safe? And so think about how all of these dominant narratives really work on our minds and how we can support other narratives, because if we're going to take power back, which I know is gonna happen, I think the outrage that people feel right now is going to translate into real political power. What are the stories of the world we want? How are we practicing them? How are you investing in artists, musicians, people that normalize and make real the world that you want to live in, right? And the last thing I'll say is remember that everything's interconnected. The right wing right now is using trans people and immigrants to advance a very harmful agenda that is also about looting the earth and about destroying climate policies and destroying international programs that the world relies on. And so when we are talking about standing up for Mother Earth, it means standing up for trans people, standing up for immigrant communities, and recognizing, standing up for reproductive justice, for the right to an abortion, right? How are these things interconnected, and how can we say this is not just a single issue fight, this is an intersectional fight?
Thank you for that, Favi. And if I may add, I think it's also about standing up for Palestinian lives as well, right? We're going to jump now to questions from the audience. Kestrel is going to pass the mic around. I think we have 10 or so minutes for questions. So thank you all for giving us some of those. Here you go.
Questions, anyone? They just had so many important things to say that everyone's in shock. Okay, here we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to all the panelists. That was just so inspirational, and I feel like I just took a lot away from that. I have a question. I feel like we heard so many huge problems on the world. I think we probably listed off maybe like 50. And for someone who I can really get into the emotions of it and get really, I think, down about this, how do you all stay so up to date with everything and so informed and continue to show up every day to do this work?
Great question.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, I can start. So first, I'm so glad I'm an artist because it allows for me to understand what's happening in the narrative that is meant to make me feel overwhelmed and that I don't want to fight. So this is by design. Project 2025 is an explicit plan to overwhelm and to bombard. So, and I love being an artist because I can go into the realm of futurism, fantasy, because the imagination is very powerful. And when you can go places that are about the world that you want, that is very comforting. What I have chosen to do is to stick to a few key issues that I'm very committed to: climate, abortion, LGBTQ issues, gender justice, and to follow those and to be super engaged. And also to hold conversations when things are, immigrant rights too, when things are really rough. The stuff around immigrants being kidnapped and taken to El Salvador has like crushed me. It's like, and when I get to see the story of Kilmar and his wife and how one story is changing people's mind, I'm like, okay, cool, there's hope. Like, it actually is about stories. That's why I also love the park rangers, because the rangers are like, they're killing it. They're killing it. And I'm like, we're winning. That's why they had to pull back on the park stuff, because people went nuts. They were like, hell's to the no. So I like tracking and then being like, okay, I'm gonna get informed and I'm gonna go hard on these themes, and then I'm gonna do art about it. And so my art says like, protect immigrant communities. I just made a piece about orcas that says we keep each other safe. So just trying to always be like, what are they doing? And then what is the opposite of that can give people hope?
I'll answer this really quickly. I think this is a panel on building community resilience, and for me, the easiest way that I've stayed informed is literally being in community with other people. Yeah. So like, I went to a bike ride that was like a global bike ride created by the Gaza Sunbirds to support Palestinians. I think it was the like historical land back march that they had done, and so we were all riding our bikes. But the organizers had some folks come out from an LA tenants organization to talk about what was happening in our city. And that informed me in a way that I was like, oh my God, I had no idea how connected this was, even though I know that everything is interconnected. And so by just showing up, I'm constantly being exposed to new ways in which this is all just one big web. And it allows me to keep up to date on all the things that I think are really important. And then I just focus on the ones that I'm super passionate about and what I can do. But it allows me to have that well-rounded view of what's going on. And it also allows me to meet other people who care. So that's the key, is meet other people who care too. Yeah.
I remember I do like environmental lobbying stuff and talk to elected officials. And I remember the week that Project Willow passed. This is 2 years ago. And we were in DC talking to elected officials about other environmental policy stuff. And I remember looking at like an elder in our group and being like, oh, like this is just such a hit to the gut. We worked so hard. 4 million young people wrote to the White House and said, please do not pass Project Willow, and it still got passed. And I was like, ugh, how do we stay in it? And he goes, oh, young one, like, welcome. And he's like, you're gonna fit, it's part of it. Like, you're gonna have ups and you're gonna have downs, and it's just part of it, but you can't let a setback stop you. And I think it's a chant that Sunrise has, that Sunrise Movement does at their chants, and they say, take a nap and come back tomorrow. You don't have to do this alone. And that's part of it too, like what you said, in community, because that's why we don't do this alone. You have others to rely on, and it's part of it.
I'll respond too, just that everybody else did. Yeah, I think part of it for me is that when you see the problem at such great scales, is also seeing solutions at those same scales and pathways to achieve those solutions. So if you look across the Brazilian Amazon. 95% of the deforestation over the past 20 years has been caused by one industry, which is the animal agriculture industry, between pastures for cattle and soy. Overwhelmingly, the soy is for domestic animal feed, for cows, chickens, pigs, and fish. So you can see that transitioning away from this economic model that's hugely inefficient economically, in addition to in terms of land use and resource use, provides a scalable solution economically that could scale better for communities, but also a hugely scalable solution for the environment. If you look at the exhibit we have over there, the Rewild Your Fridge exhibit, if we transition away from animal agriculture, which would be better for the economy of the planet, the economy of communities, for our health, for a whole number of things, we could also restore and rewild an area of land that's equivalent to the size of Africa, which is one of the answers of the quiz. You can get that answer right and win a prize. But seeing those scalable solutions and seeing people that are doing big things to achieve that and working with them is part of it for me. And you'll all get the privilege of hearing Pat later today, Pat Brown, the founder of Impossible Foods, talk more about this and more about this solution and what we can do jointly to make it happen.
I think we have time for one more question.
I guess this question is more targeted towards Lauren and Evelyn, but I guess this world that we live in is so saturated with social media, and I think social media and these platforms are also a big driver and key to kind of building communities online, even coordinating resiliency efforts like mutual aid programs. So I guess, how do you balance creating content and trying to generate buzz about these topics and areas that we care so much about, while also trying to maintain the integrity and actual operational aspect of the community of resiliency that you're building?
That is a great question, and I wish I had a perfect balance to tell you, because I'm like, girl, if you have a way to balance it, let me know. Because that has honestly been a struggle. But I think the biggest thing when it comes to social media and being able to cut through the noise and just actually connect with people on a visceral level, and this annoys me to no end that authenticity is a big buzzword. But when I say authenticity, I really just mean just showing up in your fullness and not being afraid to say the things that need to be said. With High Club as an individual and as an organization, we said Free Palestine, immediately. This is something that we've been talking about. This is something that we've been supporting, and we weren't afraid to say, even though some people still haven't even said it. And so people see that when you are willing to stick your neck out because you know it's right, and when you're willing to say the quiet parts out loud, and you're really rooted in community and fighting for people who are being, who are feeling the brunt of what's going on in any given topic. And so with that, that's how we have really been able to communicate, and also to be in community with other people, other organizations, and other initiatives. Speaking of Resistance Rangers, we helped create a mutual aid fund for the park rangers who were let go, so that people could donate, and then we could redistribute those funds to those rangers in the meantime until, I think now they're at the point where they're starting to rehire, but even that's questionable. So with that said, it's really just saying what you need to say, not being afraid to say it, because a lot of people are still afraid to say the things, and a lot of people are still afraid to not play by the rules. But honey, we are past the rules stage. As you see with Project 2025, if we continue to play by the rules, we're all done for. We need to do what we need to do to save ourselves, to save this planet, and to give the next generation a fighting chance. As I sit here pregnant very symbolically. And so with that said, it's, you show up in the ways that you wish other people were showing up, and everything else will come as a result of that.
I don't have a whole lot. That was perfect, Evelyn. The only thing I'll say is you can't show up the way you want to show up because you cannot control how others show up. And so a commitment I made to myself with my content last year was I never want to be the one who's like perpetuating climate doom, because there's plenty of that. Like, you'll find so much online that, in my opinion, creates apathy, because so many young people are like, well, what's the point? Like, if science and research is saying that we're doomed, if we're on this trajectory and our administration is on this trajectory, then what's the point? And it allows people to disengage. And so my commitment, and I think a lot of other climate content creators' commitment, was never want to leave you feeling like, what now, but then what's next? And so I love what you said about inspired action, because there's so many ways that we can use these platforms as a way to engage. Like 110,000 Californians signing for Make Polluters Pay, that matters. Like, that's something that we can present to elected officials to say, listen, your constituents care, pass this bill. Or like 4 million young people literally signed a petition from TikTok to stop Project Willow. And even though it was presented with complications, like, it can be used as a powerful tool to activate and mobilize people. So we can't control the like almighty algorithm, but we can control how we contribute to it. And I guess my invitation for anyone who creates media online is like, what's the next step for them? So they're not like, oh, but like, what now, you know?
All right, thank you all so much, and thank you for the engaged questions. I think that there were some open seats in between. So if there are open seats near you, if you can kind of scooch towards the middle so others can kind of access a seat, please. I don't know if anyone there's a lot of action, a lot of movement. If you need a bathroom break, go for it. What's that? I'm momming. It's really hard not to when I have a 5-year-old and also as like Evelyn here. If anyone was on the fence about how to get involved or how to get engaged, I feel like that panel hopefully planted some seeds, got you in the right mindset. So thank you so much for that incredible panel, Yessenia and all the panelists. We've now touched on the power of community. Maybe I'm going to give a minute for people to kind of like, I don't even know what happened. Maybe, is there something happening that I don't know about? Or maybe people realize the grazing table over there, and they're like, food! I don't know. Okay, so we've touched on the power, the immense power that community can hold, but sometimes, like, I guess you could call it toxic community, or maybe like another way of thinking about it is social pressure. It can really lead us down this sort of concerning path, in particular when it comes to buying more stuff. It's very apparent that most of us have way too many things. I think it was brought up on the panel by Fabiana about how, like, we should be thinking about our lives with abundance, not this very obsession with scarcity. But it is important that we kind of reframe things and try to think about how maybe we don't need another thing. And I think a lot of times what happens is we get in this mindset where we're bummed out about something. And when we're bummed out, we're like, I think I'm going to go buy something. I'm going to go add to cart, and then maybe I'll just feel a little bit better. You know, like we have, oh, I'm going to go do some shopping therapy, right? But a lot of times that feels like none of the voids. It just makes us feel a little more ick afterwards. So this is what our next panel is all about. It is about overcoming overconsumption and whether a collective shift in our buying mindset can really help us rethink the harmful impacts that we're seeing from corporations today. So I want to welcome Commons founder and CEO, Sanchali Pal, back to the stage. She is going to be leading this conversation. Joining Sanchali, we have Nirav Patel, the founder of Framework. We have Archana Ram, the category and brand editorial manager at Patagonia. And we have Alan Rodham, the chief strategy officer at ThreadUp. All right, Sanchali, take it away.
All right. We all have too much stuff. And every product we own is made up of resources from the earth. So there's a question like, can we have less stuff? And I think I want to start with, from a company perspective, since all three of you work at companies, companies are built on growth and delivering every quarter on new revenue and new products. Is it possible for a business to grow in a way that doesn't require endless resource extraction? Small question.
I'm happy to start. At Patagonia, we've never been shy to admit that we inherently exist in two truths. We create products, so we have an impact. We also exist to help save our home planet. So how do we sort of reconcile those two contrasting things? I think we're really mindful about growth. We're not thinking about Q1, Q2, we're thinking about years and decades. And our North Star is always, so how are we going to build the best product? Because that means people are going to have that thing for a really long time and they won't have to keep buying more and more. And that quality is in the materials we use, is, recycled inputs, even the things that have been pretty iconic for Patagonia, baggies, our baggy shorts and down sweater come to mind. They're two of our most popular products, but we're still iterating. Now they're made with Net Plus recycled nylon, which I'm sure a lot of people in this room know is from discarded fishing nets that would otherwise pollute our oceans. But we're also thinking, okay, what's the impact on people and planet? That's quality to us too. So that's partnership with fair trade, that's getting out of PFAS and actually being on that journey for 15 years to get out of forever chemistries. And that's all what quality means to us, because the goal is never to grow, but sometimes that can be the result when you're putting out quality product. And the way we sort of feel about it is, with our new ownership structure, some of you may know, which changed a couple years ago, any profits that we make that are not reinvested back into the business go to our planet. So while we would much rather have you repair your stuff, buy used through our resale platform, it's great to know that what they buy, if they do buy new, is going to be super high quality, it's going to have longevity, and the profits are going to go back to the planet. And the other thing I'll say is, I think the word sale is really interesting, and that's part of our business model in that we don't really do sales that often. And we see that as an opportunity to go against the tide. For Black Friday, we never do sales. We sort of create these pathways for people to not buy new. And it might be, come to the store on Black Friday, we're doing free in-store repairs. Or for Black Friday, we're giving 100% of profits to grassroots groups. Or we are offering a sale, but it's only on our used clothing and packs. So it's sort of like those are all alternatives to not actually acquiring new stuff, not contributing to an extractive economy. And Wornwear for sure is our most important lever in our business model. It's our resale platform. So people can trade in used Patagonia gear, buy used Patagonia gear. We have a ton of education about repair as well. And I mean, that's the most meaningful, immediate way to reduce emissions and also make sure our stuff doesn't end up in landfill, because if you're starting with quality, that stuff's gonna last generations. Like, your kids can wear it, that's the goal. We'd rather you didn't buy a new jacket. I mean, that also brings to mind, some people might be thinking, oh, the don't buy this jacket ad from 2011, it still comes up. And the goal was just, let's think critically about the stuff we consume, like just don't buy what you don't need. And with moments like that, if sales increase, like I said, it's not the goal, but it can be a result. And I think that sort of straight talk and transparency really resonated with people. And like I said, knowing the profits go back to the planet and that thing is going to last for a long time is, the way we're able to hold those two truths that I talked about.
I think if anyone isn't familiar, Patagonia ran this ad that said, "Don't buy this jacket," and it sold more jackets than like any other ad, which is this funny like sort of paradox. But I think what you're saying is like, it's kind of ironic that that's what happened, but then all those people have this really quality jacket that hopefully they'll repair and use over the long term. I think that idea of like endlessly repairable lifetime products, it's kind of gone away. Like, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, they had heirlooms. They had things that you pass down that are really high quality. You take a really long time to make them. You save up for them, or you make them yourselves or for someone you know, and then you pass them on. They're designed for generational use. And that's something that's really gone away recently, and especially in the first world. Like, that's not the way that we operate usually with Amazon Prime subscriptions and things like that. We don't really think about, decades of use when we're buying something new. But I think what you're trying to get at is like, maybe that's possible to return to. And I'm curious, like, endlessly repairable makes me think about framework. How do you approach this in terms of like disrupting an industry that exists today?
Yeah, I think one cool thing about the space that each of our companies is in is that we're like relatively small players in these giant categories. And so as we think about like driving growth within a company in a way that is like economically but also environmentally sustainable, so just for context, at Framework, we make longer-lasting consumer electronics products. We do that by designing our products to be repairable. And so computing today is a $200 billion industry. Our goal is to make it a $100 billion industry. And you'd think that would be like a very, very unpopular pitch here in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. But actually it's not. It turns out that like the economically efficient model that's also the environmentally efficient model is just good all around. It works for everyone, and I think that actually is kind of the basis of each of our companies. And so this idea that you can kind of tweak a few parameters on the product itself, build something that's high quality, do it in a way that is environmentally less harmful, and build a successful company around it, that it's not actually a paradox. Those things all actually work together.
I'll just jump in because at ThreadUp we're great admirers of Patagonia for sure. It's one of the aspirational brands that we think about frankly all the time, and yet our business model is so different than yours. So for those who don't know, ThreadUp, it's an online resale marketplace. Our whole supply chain comes from the closets of all of you, and then we resell the stuff that's good enough to sell online. We're extending the life of clothing, which I think we're aligned on. But we are proudly a public company that has to report earnings every quarter, and we're completely participants kind of in the corporate America requirement for growth for our investors. And so the way that we do it is, we do want to normalize secondhand. We want everyone to think secondhand first, and when you're looking to make that purchase, I forget. Who is mentioning the retail therapy sort of aspect of shopping? That was you, right? Yeah, that's real, right? We all actually, why don't I stop and just pander to the audience? Because I'm a lawyer by trade. I go to lawyer conferences. I go to HR conferences. The sustainability conference, you guys are the best dressed people out of all the conferences I go to. And so I have a feeling all of us here actually appreciate fashion. We appreciate clothing. We appreciate things that are well made. And we understand that. People are going to buy clothing. And I think we were sort of born, we're now fully, we think about sustainability more broadly, but I think when ThreadUp was founded, it was really more about asset efficiency. Our founder went to Harvard Business School. He had all these clothes in his closet that he wasn't going to wear anymore. He's this stuff has value. Nobody wants it. How can I get it out there in the world? And that's sort of the genesis for ThreadUp. And so our business model is to grow, and we want more people to buy secondhand. And yet, we're in the same fight of trying to keep clothing out of landfill, encourage people to buy quality, to appreciate the uniqueness of clothing, all of that.
So we're talking about how you can use existing products, existing materials, make them last longer, or put them back into use. The natural extension of that is like the concept of a circular economy fully to fruition, where everything we make can be remade into something new. My question is that possible? Like, can you imagine, at least within your industry and within your business model, can you imagine your business operating in a way that's post-waste?
I think on a long enough time scale, we're all just barreling towards the heat death of the universe. So I think like if we zoom out all the way, so we can't stop entropy, we can slow down entropy, and so like that, I think that's the goal of what a lot of us are doing here. Is to slow down entropy. And so like the traditional model in consumer industries, really like apparel and electronics, it's basically a straight line. It's resource extraction to manufacturing to use to landfill. And we don't really have a perfect circular solution to that for apparel or for electronics today. But we can turn the straight line into like a squiggly line that has like some loops around it. So like referencing electronics specifically, so like for each of those stages, and especially what we do in Framework is like for resource extraction, we can maximize the use of post-consumer recycled materials. And so we use a lot of aluminum, we use a lot of plastic, but we can't use 100% post-consumer recycled material because it actually just mechanically doesn't work to actually build these objects. We get to like 30 to 50%. And then we get to the usage phase. And so instead of using a product until it breaks or until you get bored of it and sticking it in a drawer, putting it out into the landfill, we design products to be repairable. So if something breaks, you just replace a part, repair it, keep using it for longer. So again, like that loop instead of that straight line. And then at the end, of course, finding ways to enable reuse and resale instead of it sitting in a closet or going out into a waste stream. So like really trying to loop the line a little bit.
I can jump in. I can imagine it, but when I think about that question, there's like a lot of things that would need to be true that aren't necessarily true today. So for example, technology. Like we need companies innovating and learning how to break down fibers into something that can be reused so that the manufacturers and the producers have like feedstock that is like part of the circular economy. We need governments to incentivize companies to play in the circular economy. Just like, I think about electric cars. Like, 10, 15 years ago, there weren't as many electric cars out there, obviously, and it required government subsidies to build the network to incentivize car manufacturers, frankly, to build those things. So we need technology, we need governments, we need business ecosystems like the venture capital world to sort of play in that world and fund companies that are doing it. And then we need to change like consumer behaviors, hearts and minds. And that can be done through community building. It can be done through, like frankly, companies just educating the world on how products are actually made. We had this interesting conversation actually at dinner last night where the person I was sitting next to sort of put it eloquently. They're like, there's all these externalities that come with the things that we make, especially with clothing, apparel. And if we forced these companies and these manufacturers to internalize their externalities, I think you would learn what the true cost of the product is. That's why some things cost more. I saw an article today in CNN. It said like, it's talking about tariffs and everything. And the headline was, "Is this the end of the $5 T-shirt?" And I had to sit there and think like, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I don't know. It's like that's something to debate.
Yeah, something we think about a lot is like value versus cost. It's like, I think each of you in different ways are trying to educate consumers about a different way to buy or to think about price, and to think about it maybe longer term than like the immediate purchase. Is there something that gives you hope or sort of the idea that maybe your business model is going to be more successful because you can imagine, or you can see a way that consumption is shifting, and sort of like where are consumers giving you cover to grow in a different way?
I will say, on the point of circularity, which is related to this, I think it's hard, but the way we get there faster and more meaningfully is when we link arms. And by that, I mean with supply chain partners, with customers, really like opening eyes and ears to feedback. You know, there's the circularity and the durability of recycled inputs. That's definitely a big part of it. We rely a lot on recycled materials, and that's through partnerships with our supply chain partners who have the same standards as us and want the best stuff out there. But then there's also engaging with customers and hearing where they're at, and I think that's how we've built a robust platform with Warrenware. You know, it's really level setting with customers about what they're getting, you know, telling them about our quality control, telling them everything's backed by ironclad, and also explaining to them like that they have a role in this circularity, in changing consumption habits. You know, it's not just a one-way street. We're in dialogue. We host a lot of Warrenware events, and that's like the most fun we ever have because we're really talking to people. They're telling us stories about their gear. They're excited. And also with our wetsuits, that's an amazing opportunity we've seen to figure out an end-of-life solution and help people understand their changed consumer habits. We use the data that customers tell us about their wetsuits, what things needed repair, what needs to change, and we make our wetsuits better. When it's finally beyond repair and we can't fix it, we've partnered with Boulder Industries in Colorado to find an end-of-life solution. So it's that linking arms of reaching out to customers, reaching out to supply chain partners. Like, we've never said we could do this alone. In fact, we've said, come with us, let's all do it together. And I also think there's a little bit of we need to cut ourselves some slack, and I say that because I interviewed a neurologist and a consumer psychology professor, and it was just, why do we keep buying new stuff? Like, I really wanted to understand like what's actually happening in our brains. And there's like a real reason in our brains. We're designed to prefer something novel versus something old. And way back when, prehistoric times, this was a survival mechanism. Now it's just one of the contributing factors to overconsumption. We actually get like a little boost of dopamine when we see something novel. And so cut yourself some slack. It's also capitalist-driven marketing, for sure. But there's something else at play, and I think what's really empowering is it's not new we necessarily prefer, it's novel. And I think that's where secondhand thrifting, understanding the value of repair and holding on to something really matters. And that's how we can change behavior. Because I think it's admittedly very hard to encourage huge masses of people to consume less. Possible, for sure. But I think it's very realistic and attainable and meaningful to encourage people to think about consumption in a different way, that there are other pathways that don't involve anything that's new. So this is just my PSA that if your Patagonia gear has a busted zipper, a burn hole or something, please don't go buy a new one. We have repair for that. So, you know, it's that kind of education with customers and really talking to people.
I get optimistic. We put this resale report out every year that's like a survey of you know, the industry and customers and their preferences. And you know, every year we see that online resale is growing much faster than traditional retail, which is encouraging, I guess, for ThreadUp, but also for the industry. You see the trends like accelerate in millennials and Gen Z. So the younger generation's definitely more aware of like the sustainability profile of the clothing they buy. But then I also get depressed because, frankly, the younger generations are the ones that are buying all this ultra-fast fashion as well. There's definitely a paradox happening where, you know, the stuff is made so cheaply and brought into this country so cheaply that it's hard to compete, frankly. Like the resale, we definitely see ourselves as competitors to fast fashion. And you know, sometimes initially I was like confused about why the same generation would be sort of proliferating both resale and fast fashion. But at the end of the day, it actually makes sense because the younger generation has less purchasing power than the older generation, and everybody's trying to stretch their dollar as far as it can go and acquire things that make them happy, the dopamine hit or the something that's novel. So again, I think, you know, if we can watch like regulation and technology and all of these things come into play to level the playing field for resale, for repair, for products that are higher quality and are going to last longer. And we can establish that value in the mind of the consumer, then we can sort of see the scale shift, tilt a little bit.
Maybe I'll ask one last thing before we switch to questions, which is, can you give an example? Like, everyone wants to know, like, do my choices matter? Do consumers make a difference? Is there an example of a user interview or a customer data point that changed your business decisions for the better to be more sustainable?
I mean, I mentioned the wetsuit repairs, so for sure, taking that customer feedback and literally designing wetsuits differently in certain respects, for sure. I think also maybe not so much changing business decisions so much as reaffirming what our North Star is meeting people who are so excited to have their gear repaired. And just seeing that, oh, they do care about their stories. We're not just like putting something out into the ether. This is not a marketing spiel. It's like, we really believe in it, and oh wait, they believe in it too. And it's reaffirming, and it really goes back to, we're all on this thing together. And by on, I mean on Mother Earth together. So like, let's do it together. Let's create that energy together, because I believe that's really powerful. And online shopping is one thing, but coming together in community, to go back to the community resilience, it might be clothing, it might be about shopping, but there is something inherently beautiful about people geeking out over the stuff they've had for so long. I think there's something really powerful in that. So I'll just say that reaffirms what we do every day.
Yeah, one thing that we've learned is really meeting people where they are. So like, a lot of our customers are tech enthusiasts. And so we've gone out there with environmentally friendly, basically like messaging around reducing environmental impact, and it goes in one ear and out the other, just does not register in the slightest. But we figured out that when we talk about repair and repairability and ownership, that lands. Like, people love repair in our audiences, even though for us in electronics, those are actually the same thing. And so what we've really figured out over the last few years is to like figure out what makes sense, like what starting point each of our customers are coming from, and then to make sure that at the end of the day, they are getting the benefits that apply to them out of the product, but that still ladder back up to our overall mission. And that has been working pretty well.
I mean, zooming out, I would say, I'll answer your question in a second, but I think for this audience, one thing that's very inspiring is to feel like you work at a company that at least on some level feels like it's a force for good. It could be anything. It could be sustainability. It could be the way that you sort of treat your hourly workforce, however. But that part is inspiring to work at. In terms of like customer feedback that's changed our business model, two examples came to mind for me at ThreadUp. The first one was, we have this clean out bag that you can order from the website. So it's a plastic bag. You order it. We deliver it to your house. You open it up. You put all your clothes in. You send it back to us. And we figured out a way to recycle the bag. So like, that bag that comes back to us actually has also as part of like a reuse initiative. But we had a customer basically complain that like, can't I just use my Amazon box that's just laying around? And that sort of like ticked off in our minds, and we actually created like the digital label that we didn't have before. And now, yeah, you could just print your own label at home and use the box that you already have at home. And like, all these extra boxes that we all have from all the e-commerce shopping that we're doing actually they can have more than one use. They can have actually like lots of uses. So that part changed our business model. The other thing was, we sell used clothing, right? And we're trying to make that used clothing very attractive for people to want to buy, and we're photographing it in our distribution centers. And so we were like steaming all the clothes, using an incredible amount of water. Some of our employees are actually getting burns from the steamers. And so we ran a test, and we noticed that it actually didn't change the conversion rate, whether it was like a little bit wrinkled online or not. And so we stopped steaming. And that ended up being like the sustainable solution. And we didn't think that would be true. And so that changed.
Those are great examples. Thank you so much. I think it is so helpful to hear that companies aren't just making up products and then throwing them into the ether. Like, they're responding to customer demand. And especially as a customer myself, it's super helpful to hear tangible examples when companies are changing their products or their practices because of things that people are asking for. So it's really helpful to remember that feedback loop. Okay, I'd love to open up for questions from the audience. How do we do microphones? Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Anandi. Thank you so much for the lively discussion. My question is generic. Being in the field that you work in, how do you incentivize consumers to not go in, to bring about behavioral change necessarily, and not go in for the retail therapy that we were talking about, not buy a new jacket when there's a little bit of a rip, or not buy that extra pair of heels that you certainly don't want, and specifically targeting customers who belong to the rich, let's say, category, who can afford to buy that extra jacket. How do you target those customers to bring about behavior change?
Yeah, I'd say one for us in electronics specifically is to make it convenient, make like product longevity and repairability and reducing environmental impact like the convenient choice. Like, civilization is like a 10,000-year search for convenience, and so we want to make sure that repair is actually more convenient than replacing that product. And we can see that today. Like, people are using their phones for longer, the laptops for longer, the TVs for longer, because it's just inconvenient to have to replace it and move all your data and deal with a new device. And so we want to make it more convenient than that to do the repair. And convenience applies like regardless of income level.
I definitely connect with that. The convenience and also the fun. So for us, we recognize that shopping secondhand is inherently more difficult than shopping new. You go online to Patagonia or Nordstrom or any of these retailers, it's really easy to see the beautiful imagery of the product and sort of fall in love with it and all of that. And so we recognize at ThreadUp we're at like an inherent disadvantage because we're taking used clothing, we're trying to like straighten it out and put it on a model, take a photograph of it. And so we're constantly trying to innovate and make secondhand shopping fun. So for example, like when a lot of the artificial intelligence tools sort of became more mainstream and available, we created products like image search where you can just take a picture of anybody wearing a fabulous outfit and upload it to ThreadUp, and like the magic of artificial intelligence can map that against our inventory, and you can sort of reduce the thrift overwhelm of like searching through 5 million unique snowflakes on our website to find what you want. Or we started Style Chat, which is sort of another way to sort of make the search function much more fun. Instead of typing in like red dress, medium, this style, you can type in something that's more either connected to like a micro trend that you care about, or like a celebrity that you saw. Or even for me, the anecdote I like to share is for St. Patrick's Day, I just typed in like, dress me up like a leprechaun. And because of that technology, it actually knew what it was, and it was sort of like fun to play around with it. So making it convenient and making it fun is definitely part of that recipe.
I'd say for us, we're also thinking about that. How can we make reuse or holding on to something for years and generations fun? And storytelling is a powerful vehicle for us, both long form, print journal, and film as well. And one of the series I love, we do a series called Stories We Wear, and we basically settle in with someone who's had a piece of Patagonia gear for years and years, and we just talk to them about what have you gotten up to in this gear and why have you held on? And we have really amazing ambassadors and athletes, but honestly, I think the real stories about real people are what resonate. And I've heard emotional stories, funny stories, sweet stories of 5 little kids in a family all wearing the same fleece. And it's not a marketing spiel. We're not trying to get someone to buy at the end of it. It's actually, no, hold on to the stuff you've got. So I think storytelling can be a very powerful lever for a brand. In a non-icky way. Honestly, I have a journalism background, so going to the brand world, it's sort of a little bit uncomfortable at first. So I feel proud that we believe in like really authentic storytelling where we don't necessarily want to sell something. We just want to tell a good story and change the way people think about the choices they make every day.
That's what makes you guys so iconic.
I give that credit to Yvonne Chenard.
All right, any other questions?
Thank you all for all your information that you've been sharing. And my name is Clementina, Sustainable Latina, and my question is, with the tax tariffs, how are you, that $5 t-shirt that we know is no longer going to exist, how are you using this as a possible silver lining? Are you incorporating it into campaigns or your business plans going forward? Because I do think there's an opportunity there for the shift to happen for slow fashion.
Do you mind if I jump in on that? Sure. So in some ways, I feel like I'm like the we're like the Forrest Gump of tariffs. We just sort of like stumbled into this moment. Because, you know, resale, especially like a United States resale company, all of our product has been domesticated, right? It's been manufactured and produced overseas. It's been sold once in the United States. It's in someone's closet, and now it's getting resold from a domestic closet to the next customer. And so I do think for specifically resale is like a rare winner of what's going on. And you know, we had actually been advocating for the closure of that de minimis loophole for the last couple years, actually. And it wasn't really related to the broader tariff war that's happening right now. It was much more about leveling the playing field between, you know, the fast fashion and apparel that's produced really cheaply and imported under that de minimis exception versus resale and onshoring and bringing back like American textile manufacturing industry that's really died over the last several decades. And so, you know, we're hopeful that that $5 t-shirt does exist in resale, and so you'll buy it secondhand instead of buying it new.
I think it's a really delicate thing because, yes, we have this platform where people can buy gear that's been domesticated. That's the perfect word. But this is a really tricky time. We're in a very politically heated, unstable time where a lot of people are suffering. So I'm very hesitant to use that as a mode of marketing, you know, because we have new, we have used, like there's quite a nuanced conversation about it. And right now, it's not a moment for us to elevate that because there's a lot of suffering going on in terms of tariffs. So that's where I think storytelling comes into play. Well, let's take a beat and think about how we do want to position resale, if at all. Because for right now, we're letting customers come to us with the communication we already have, but elevating that because of what's going on in the news, I think we have to be very careful about that.
This is like a perfect moment of controversy between two companies that are
We're
so
going
aligned.
head to
We're so
head.
aligned on everything else, and yet that is something that we're also internally talking about. Like, how aware are consumers about like what's going on with tariffs? How much fear do they have about how that's going to impact their lives? And we all know that this impacts people at the lower income much more dramatically than it does at the middle and upper incomes. It's definitely like a straight line in that respect. And so we did have this sort of internal struggle. Like, on the one hand, do we want to like capitalize on the moment and sort of treat it more crassly? But then on the other hand, it's a real educational moment. What's going on in the world today? And we've been spending 15 years trying to educate people on where clothing is made, where it comes from, what happens when you like throw it out, and you know what that does, not just in the United States but internationally. And so we're going to lean in on it, but it definitely was like an internal struggle, particularly in the marketing department.
It's really hard. Yeah. It's like and I think a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. It's super nuanced. I totally align with that.
And I think one other thing to add to that is this idea that like resale and repair are chaos resilient to some extent. Like as you see supply chain chaos come into play, whether that's from like tariffs or you know, pandemic and locking down you know, international transport, the idea that you can extend longevity through resale or through repair like enables some level of resilience. And so that's something that like I think each of us are plugging into in different ways.
All right, any more questions?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Brianna. I'm the founder and CEO of Enact. We do sustainable towels out of hemp. And we have justified taking up space in the market because our product is something that people usually don't want to reuse. And so that's kind of like what keeps our ethos going. But we hosted a panel at UT Austin this past fall. And one of the things we talked about was that the role that business schools play in consumption, and that they're being taught growth at all cost. And so we were talking about, like, if we could create models that the business schools could take, that it's not just hockey stick growth, it's donut economics, it's circular economy, you know, could that be a starting place for us, so we don't have these extractive economies? So I'm curious, like, what models drive you at your companies, and like, what do you look at that you would, if you could give to a business student, they could say, okay, we're going to go from linear to circular via this?
I love that. I think that's a great idea. And I think, like, the key thing for those students is to go identify the $100 billion industries that are dominated by like 5 giant stable incumbents, and to figure out the specific product business model combination that drives a wedge and takes down the incumbents. And just as an example for us, like, we're counterpositioned against the big Dell, HP, Lenovo, Apple type companies in the world because we're designing our products to last longer. Like, we want them to last longer, and we're capturing market share. But for one of those companies to try to make their products last longer actually obviously harms them from a revenue generation standpoint. So it's not something that they can easily transform themselves into doing. Like, if the CEO of Dell, well, not Dell, because Michael Dell can do whatever he wants. So the CEO of HP goes to the board and says, we're going to make our products last twice as long and cut our revenue in half. That CEO is being shown the door. That as a startup, which I'm sure many folks in this room are parts of startups, or many of these students are going to start their own companies, they have the opportunity to go and identify the thing that the big company can't do.
Yeah, I think a lot about, you know, sometimes if growth at all costs becomes like a race to the bottom to be sort of like the cheapest and biggest. And, you know, something our CEO teaches us is like compete to be unique. And that's really how you win over time. And, you know, yes, the growth can matter to a company, but you know, if you're going to be in the for-profit space, which is kind of where we're at, profitability matters too. So if you can, again, design a unique business model, design a unique product that's better on some dimension than the incumbent, and that can be because it lasts longer, and you develop, you know, a rabid following of devotees in your customer base, and you figure out the unit economics of it, and it's profitable, you don't necessarily have to grow at all costs. You can, you know, build a very successful business that's got modest growth, but that's profitable and can employ people and pay them a fair wage, and, you know, feel like you know, your company is a force for good in the world. And so there are many ways to do it, and I totally resonate with the sort of like concern about growth at all costs.
And I'll just add that when Patagonia changed its ownership model a couple years ago, Earth is now our only shareholder. That's the line you may have seen. We created a trust, so our values stay in place, and we created a 501c4, so, you know, the money can go to these critical ecosystems like the Tongass National Forest, and the money is going to the things we really believe in. And I use the royal we because I personally had nothing to do with it, but I admire it. But the hope of doing something like that is not to make a big splash in the New York Times. It's so we can create a different way of doing business. So hopefully these students who are in business school could see that there is another way to go about it. And that's the goal through all this, is model a different way of existing as a business in today's world, because we sure as hell need it.
Can I plug, actually, there's a new stock exchange called the Long-Term Stock Exchange. And it is a principles-based stock exchange. So every company that's listed on it, and there are only 2 companies listed on it today, ThreadUp is one of them, has to, you know, commit to long-term principles that incorporate, the impact to the environment, the community, impact to your employee base. And after we went public, we joined the long-term stock exchange and sort of codified ThreadUp's 5 core long-term principles. And I encourage you guys it's all public. You can go look it up. That helped us explain to our board of directors who we are from a foundational point of view. And it helps us compete internally with the demands of what NASDAQ and our public shareholder base requires. And we're trying to use that as a differentiator. We really hope that many more public companies join the long-term stock exchange, and we can create a cohort. And over time, what we want to show is that cohort can actually deliver, not just returns to shareholders, but also to the environment, to a broader stakeholder base. So please look up long-term stock exchange, right after this panel's done.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that question, too. I think a lot of this has to do with reimagining our systems as well. It's not just bottom-up change, it's also from the top down. And so thinking about, I went to business school, I chose to start a business. I think about these governance questions a lot. What are the metrics that we can work towards, long-term customer retention, instead of optimizing for basket size? There's a lot of really interesting things to think about where companies can differentiate and build businesses that are going to disrupt the industries that they're entering. So thank you 3 for running and working on really unique businesses in big industries. We need more change. I'm going to close this panel and give back over to Kestrel so we can tell you all what's next. Thank you.
I feel like one thing that's very, very clear is that not only are we overconsuming, but businesses are often overproducing. And so they touched on it a bit in the last panel, thinking about the role that businesses play in thinking beyond solely profit. Also, how can Earth and its inhabitants become additional stakeholders in a business's success? So this next conversation is all about this idea of transforming business. So I want to welcome up our moderator, science and environment journalist, Rachel Sonansky. And joining Rachel, we have Katina Boutis, Everlane Senior Director of Sustainability and Sourcing. We have Rachel Kibbe, the CEO of Circular Services Group and American Circular Textiles. And Beth Espinette, the founder of Unspun. All right, Rachel, it's all you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. And I'm especially excited that we're following the overconsumption panel, because I feel like these topics are super related and intertwined. And I was just going to say, when the founder of a Swedish brand once said to me that he thinks about the business model as what you do and how you do it. And so that's how I kind of think about the overconsumption piece, and how you rely on, how you drive profitability is the what you do, and then the business practices, how you source, what materials you use, how you engage with your suppliers is the how. So that's what we're here to talk about, more of the how. So we'll get started. I want to start with just sort of making the case for building sustainability into your business model. How do you make the case for change to C-suite executives and to investors? And is the answer for that different now than it was 6 months ago? Katina, maybe let's start with you.
Sure. I feel like we just need like a deep breath for the moment that we're in, because maybe to answer your second question first, no, I think a lot has changed in the past 6 months, and we do need to kind of acknowledge that the playing field is very different, and we are thinking about things, we're talking about things in a very different way than we were, honestly, even like 3 weeks ago. So it is a very challenging time, but it's also, I think there's a lot of continuity, especially as sustainability practitioners. I think that's sort of what we're here kind of talking about. So I imagine there are many of us in the room that kind of think of ourselves that way. But we are sort of inherently, we've always had this really unique but challenging task of being educators and engagers to a wide variety of stakeholders inside of the businesses or the organizations that we're in, as well as, as well as consumers, kind of industry at large. We've always had to kind of bridge a lot of gaps and a lot of knowledge gaps in particular, and being able to code switch in different conversations of how you talk about sustainability to different types of people or different people who occupy different pieces of a business puzzle. So we've always been in that space, and we've also, I think, been really trained for how to make the case outside of just this is the right thing to do. I don't know how many people have actually had budgets passed or projects approved just on it's the right thing to do. I know that sometimes that can be, the final kind of sway, but that is never the only reason. So we're kind of trained in the space of being able to showcase value across a number of different, ways of communicating or ways of kind of demonstrating a value proposition, connecting social and environmental impacts to business needs and business imperatives. So in that way, we're kind of still doing the same work. But I think we're in a very different landscape today. And, so many people on the panels before us have articulated it so well. But in a very real business sense, specifically in regards to the incoming tariffs that are additional and incremental in terms of fees that are going to be imposed on businesses and in many cases passed on to consumers, that there's a very real kind of business impact that we're all feeling and we're all trying to figure out how to contend with. And there's a lot of uncertainty and instability in just the conversations and the whiplash that we're all feeling over the past couple of weeks. So it feels really hard to be strategic right now, just kind of in this landscape. So there's also that, I think, additional element of how do we bring this work forward? How do we continue to do this good work in the short term, but also the long term? Because again, in sustainability, we're all thinking about the long-term plays here. So it's a challenging time, certainly, but it's kind of always been a challenging time for those of us in this field. So in many ways, it's still the same. But I also think about sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, but just in terms of 6 months ago and where we are today, the proof points are still the same. We've just actually published our 2024 impact report earlier this morning. And the sort of theme that we coalesced around for this year's report is progress is possible. And that's because whenever we're looking back at this previous year of impact and even the past 4 to 5 years as we've been on this very holistic sustainability journey as a brand, we see that the proof is happening. We have reduced our overall carbon emissions, scope 1 through 3, by 52% since we started this journey in 2021 and set our targets. We're more than halfway towards achieving our 2030 goals. We have done this at the same time we have built value for our company. We have built brand equity with our customers, and maybe importantly, as somebody else already alluded to on the stage, we've built profitability for our brand year over year. So as we're achieving these really important, really meaningful, measurable sustainability goals, and that's just one kind of very clear example, we're also building business value. So finding those places where the two things interconnect, intertwine, where you can find those win-win solutions. And there are a lot of them out there. And people will tell you no first and a second time and a third time. But you kind of have to keep going back and finding different inroads of how to talk about this to different audiences. So anyway, it is possible and it can happen. You just have to be a little tenacious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe let's hear, because you all have such different perspectives and roles in this industry. So maybe talk about how you see people making this case to the decision makers, really.
Yeah, it's a super interesting topic, especially between the three of us, because we all do have such different perspectives. So I lead a public policy coalition called American Circular Textiles, and so we're representing organizations who have a vested interest in growing the circular economy in apparel and footwear primarily, and also domestic manufacturing, to lawmakers at the federal and state level. And so our trajectory as an organization has been interesting because from the start, which was in 2022, we decided we would be bipartisan or nonpartisan. And what does that mean? We, as a membership, and now we've tripled in size over the past year, we represent retailers, resale, rental, repair, and everything in between, technology service providers. We decided that we are environmental organizations by definition in a lot of ways. Like the leadership is bought in, let's say. By being a part of our coalition, they're literally bought in because they're paying to be part of our coalition, right? So what does that mean right now in 2025 under this administration and in this sort of political climate? And we've had to do a lot of soul searching, even though we are bipartisan. And so in January, it was a tough time for leadership within my organization because we were having tough conversations with organizations in our membership about what is environmental policy now, like what is sustainability, doesn't matter. That affects our ability to lobby as an organization because lobbying costs money. So we had the sort of a two-pronged thing, our own business and then the businesses who are part of our business, right? And over the last few months, it's been really interesting because we have this framework where we approach policy, whether we're in Washington, D.C. or we're in the state of California, saying, what kind of jobs does this create? What kind of economic development is this offering? We are environmental companies, and whether we're in a Democratic office or a Republican office, we're leading with what we can bring to, we've talked about communities a lot, what we can bring to communities to better communities in terms of economic resilience and job and workforce development. So over the last few months, it's become, we just stuck to our guns and we shifted our narrative a bit. We even had to go through our website and made sure we're not totally leaning on environment and we're really, really leaning into the workforce and economic opportunity. But we noticed we didn't have to make very many changes. And that, since the beginning, has served us. In fact, we introduced the first piece of legislation with Congress last year ever to address reuse and recycling of textiles in history of the United States. And we worked on that piece of legislation with a Republican congressman, Senator Bill Cassidy. The reason that interested him is he is bought into the environment, but he's really interested in providing jobs to Louisiana and economic development. And so, it's been interesting. A lot of our members are startups, and it's a really tough environment to raise right now. And so they have come to us about how to talk to their investors. And we have always said, the environment is so important, and it's important to your organization, but what's most important is that you can grow, and we talked a lot about growth, but we do believe that the future of manufacturing is circularity, and that inherently should be an environmental model, but it does have to grow. It only grows with profitable unit economics, which requires scales and entire system change. And so it's been a really interesting time in narrative, and in fact we did our first executive lobby day in DC a few months ago, which was very interesting. This was before all the reciprocal tariffs were announced, I believe, or like the week before or the week after. So I didn't know what I was walking into and bringing these executives into. And what we found is the work is being done, and in fact it's being thought of in ways that I think are in many ways more creative, because people are starting to say, like, how do we get Republicans on board? How do we stop the next administration from being Republicans, Democrats, and MAGA. And which is really what it is, and no one's talking about that, right? There are a lot of moderate people on the Hill trying to get things done, and we're at a stalemate unless we all sort of get together and coalition build. And organizations like ours now are starting to play a role because we can kind of bridge gaps between parties, which is very strange, and it's a very interesting place to be. So I'm strangely optimistic.
I will say that Unspun, we attended that day, and it was amazing. And I'll admit, I'm a little scared to admit this, but the Republican that we met first, I really appreciated his perspective. I think the most out of everyone we met with, which was weird for me. So going back to your question, approaching the C-suite, you have to remember that the C-suite is measured by how the company does, and how the company does is measured by profit. So we really have to go back and think about what's their language, what does success means for them. Unfortunately, that's kind of the world we still live in. It's amazing to hear about ThreadUp joining the long-term stock exchange, which is new for me, and I am like, how do we get Unspun on this thing? But at Unspun, we're a PBC, we're a public benefit corporation. It's very hard to, in the boardroom, have the space and time to talk about stakeholders and shareholders who aren't the ones who own a piece of that pie. But if you're a PBC, legally, you are supposed to actually represent more than just the stakeholders who own that pie of the company. You also are supposed to talk about the ones who are affected by what your company does, by all of its activities. So that might be your employees, that might be the planet, that might be future generations, that might be your customers. So it's an interesting thing to think about as a board, but still very, very rare. And then something else that this is again another anomaly, is one of our partners, Decathlon Sports, they're able to bring in a little bit more of that sustainability thinking by actually incorporating their bonus plan structure into how well did you reduce emissions for your company, and then your bonus is kind of based on that. But those are the very few examples, and then Everlane, of course, is doing incredible stuff as well. There are very, very few examples of companies that can kind of justify it. So for the most part, you kind of have to go to the C-suite with the language they speak, which is return on investment, opening new markets. It's something that, fortunately, I think a lot of sustainability can be reframed into. A lot of us in this room, we really do think from the heart, but there are ways to reframe it. So at Unspun, some examples, and maybe I can pull some other examples of what other companies have done. So what we're able to do is reduce global carbon emissions by combining steps of the process for manufacturing. So if you think about it, if you're trying to do everything for manufacturing under one roof, you're being very efficient, which is good for sustainability and also good for business. So there are a lot of processes in innovation and new things that we think about that can kind of follow that model. If you're more efficient, not only is that good for environment, it's also good for business. But there are other things to think about as well. Like if you're in the materials space, you can kind of make the case for having more reliable sourcing, which is something that I think a lot of executives are nervous about now. If you're in resale, which we saw earlier, there are very clear ways to kind of recapture value. So I think there are some really creative ways we can go about it. And I mean, what is good business if the business that you have can't be sustained by this planet? We need to rethink the way that we frame it for the C-suite in the meantime.
Yeah. We have more questions than we have time to address. So I want, since tariffs are sort of the topic of the moment, and it has so much to do with the supply chain, and the supply chain is where the work of sustainability happens. It's where it has to happen, and it's where, brands can't change anything if suppliers aren't doing the work to change it. So can we talk about how the tariff conversation and the sort of ping pong that's happening affecting efforts that are already underway? And if we can keep answers quick. That would be good. Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll start. I already sort of started to reference this earlier. Yeah, the work that we're doing, we're thinking 5 years out from now. We're thinking of what we can invest in today and which partners, 1 tier, 2 tier, 3 tiers removed from us, even at the farming level, of who we're trying to build a resilient and strong supply chain to support our current and future needs of our business while achieving these sustainability goals that we've set out for ourselves. So these types of universal tariffs make it really challenging to think about the work in a strategic way, knowing that there are incredible costs associated.
I am curious, since suppliers, you share suppliers with other brands, so other brands might not be as committed to longer-term relationships. So, are suppliers that you work with, on the fence about whether they continue something because they don't have incentive from another brand to continue? Is that happening?
That always enters the conversation, especially whenever we're engaging with newer suppliers or suppliers that we haven't yet identified as being a strategic opportunity. But actually in the conversations we've had in the aftermath of this turmoil that we're all in right now, everybody's really engaged. Everyone is really committed. I think the suppliers around the world, also domestically, are seeing this situation. And there's sort of an amazing, almost community building in a sense that I really haven't seen before, of suppliers and brands really standing together in this moment of how do we make sure that our business models can sustain at least the next 3.5 years. Like, what do we need to do to partner together in this work? On an economic level, certainly on an environmental level, so that we can continue to do this work for the long term. So that's actually where the majority of our conversations have started and ended, which has been really refreshing. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short.
Very, very short. I think of the look.
I'll try. So for us, we represent so many different types of businesses, and we're getting a lot of questions now from the media about this must be great for the organizations in your membership because they're circular or they're resale, and it's just not that simple. It's TBD. It could potentially have a positive knock-on effects for circularity here in the United States because circularity is best done regionally, and as was mentioned, it's kind of a domestic product. But we also have members in organizations in our membership who are domestic manufacturers, and you can't purchase cotton shirting here that's made in the United States or buttons necessarily. We don't make them here, right? And so, and even if you're a resale company, I was saying yesterday, like you may have handheld devices that you import from China that you're using in your operation. So the answer is complicated, but what has been interesting is it has force this conversation at a national level about what are tariffs, who pays for them, right? Why can't we make things here in the United States, which is something as an organization we have been trying to work on for the last 3 years. And so in a strange way, it has been helpful because we have already developed policies, and our sort of framework for developing policies is the answer to that question. Tariffs are a big, heavy stick, right? And everybody's saying they're not going to work, they're just passed on to consumers. Like, what's the point of all this? Well, the answer is you need carrots and sticks, right? And so we are very, especially at the federal level, we lean really into incentives. Like, we looked at 20 years of EV and renewable energy policy and basically created a framework through a bill called the Americas Act, which, if passed, would create tax credits to bring machinery over from China, and $14 billion of grants and loans for textile reuse and recycling and reverse logistics, and machinery and components, and public education programs and innovation, and that's the carrot, sort of the framework, which if you're going to
we also would like to see like a ramp up period, right? Like not, like we're not saying that tariffs are the answer and carrots will solve it, but we're not totally against tariffs. The last thing I'll say is that the Biden administration passed the IRA, IIJA, the largest sustainability initiatives in federal history, like billions, if not trillions of dollars, ostensibly, although they're hard to access for sustainability. Textiles was left out. And so now we've seen textiles raised to a national issue because it is one of the things we don't make here, right? And so that gives us some media material to be able to go to our lawmakers and say, hey, like we've been left out. Like how are you gonna help us do it here? So.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, it is kind of a national security issue. But yeah, it's agree with both of them that it's very, very sticky and complicated. I mean, 98% of what we're wearing right now was imported, probably even more, to be honest, because most of the things that are imported are probably went to the Department of Defense, and I don't know if there are any soldiers out here, but so very unlikely that any of us are wearing things that were made here, and so it's very, very complicated. But I will say that we're trying to make the best of it, to your point. So one of my co-founders, Walden, just put out a tariff apocalypse guide. You should go check it out. And it gives you a little bit of hope for this chaotic scene that we have in front of us. But he gives an example scenario that I think gives, I'm done. All right. How's this? Yeah, okay. Sorry, Vivian. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this example, but so it gives kind of the example of what would we need to do to compete with Bangladesh. So for example, it's about $13 to make a product in Bangladesh today, bring it in. Now with tariffs, it's gonna be about $17. In the US, this is for a pair of chinos, by the way. It's about $22 to make that in the US with just manual labor. So if we're able to remove only $5 of that labor using probably automation, that's what we're trying to do anyway, then it's very, very likely that we can then onshore production, which gives me some hope. So we need to do more than just adding the tariffs. We need to also support the infrastructure and the innovation to bring it onshore.
I'm going to just add one question before we turn it over to the Q&A, but just to shift it back to sort of the core of the conversation rather than tariffs. I wanted to talk about the role of the consumer, and I feel like we hear a lot, it's not the role of the consumer to change the industry, but also the consumers have a role, so I feel like we can skip over that part. And I'm hoping you can address what role you think the brand has in shaping what consumers are asking for, like in sort of making sustainability the choice, rather than like waiting for them to demand it. So if we can address that while I hand the mic to Kestrel to start the audience Q&A.
I mean, brands have really dictated trends for a long time. Jacquemus can like hype a nano-sized bag. Balenciaga can hype like Croc shoes. Coperni can hype a like spray-on dress. Like why can't they hype, I don't know, responsibility? So I think that brands really do have the power, and they should take it.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Yeah, and I think, we've seen that consumers are not necessarily willing to pay more at a scale we need, and that the costs can only come down if there's more demand for sustainable product. And I like to sort of think about how I sometimes shop for organic produce and sometimes don't. And a lot of times it's just because I'm not even aware. Sometimes I'll grab something and I can't wait to the day that, it's the new and used side by side, and it's just that accessible.
Yeah. I totally agree with everything you've both just said. I think there's also some inherent challenges just in the brand perspective. We have a very limited runway with which to tell a story and educate and engage consumers, and you have to do it in a way that you don't need a PhD to understand it, but you also don't want to dumb the information down so much that you start to trivialize the issues that we're talking about. So it is a very delicate, interesting, strange balance that I think at least we at Everlane are really trying to do. But it's tough and it's competitive, and customers are very funny and they will tell you they want something and then they won't behave the way that you expect them to whenever you try to deliver that thing. So there's a lot of calculus, there's a lot of unknowns that we're trying to grapple with whenever we're doing this, but there's also ways that we're trying it, like in our impact report, for example, or in different creative ways of trying to signal to customers that there's a benefit or a value inherent in something that we've produced and brought to market and the reason why it exists. And we track that information, actually, because it's really important to know how it's performing. And we see that it performs really well outside of like choose the color, choose the size, add to cart, which some people would argue is the most important part about our website. Not me. But we see the next best thing, or the next most engaged section on our website is all of the sustainability content. People are clicking on it. People are spending time on it. People who actually make it to our sustainability pages are converting at higher percentages than people who are just coming to our homepage, which has a higher volume, definitely. But we actually see a value that's being created there. So we're trying to tap into what's happening there and how do we actually learn from that behavior? How can we track some of those metrics a little bit better so that we can not just capture the people that we already know are interested in this subject, but actually grow this community and adopt some more in the process.
That's fascinating. Thanks for sharing. Do we have time for maybe a couple questions? One or two? Does anyone have questions?
Questions, anyone? Really? Okay, here it is.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for the panel. So I actually had like a personal question, kind of looking for advice. So my mom was actually visiting this past weekend, and we were debating about Amazon. She had like purchased this thing, and I was like, yo, Amazon's evil, why are you doing this? And she's like, well, I know you always tell me that, and it's not helpful. And we would go into like this rabbit hole of conversation. But what's interesting is that, so she actually runs a small business in daycare, and it's, it barely breaks even. She can't raise her prices on on the families and so on. And I was kind of wondering, like, how would you think about like giving advice to somebody who actually, she's not like an over-consumer, but when it comes to like business expenses, like a lot of the stuff she's choosing based on price, like solely price. So if you think about daycare, it's like stuff like toilet paper, diapers, all these like supplies and whatnot. And so I like totally empathize, but I can't, it's really hard to kind of have that conversation with her when it's, especially in this economy, right? So I was just kind of curious, like, how you might approach this conversation. And I'm trying, so yeah, but thank you.
Great question. I mean, that's a hard one. That's a really hard one. What you described right there is like the American, right? And that's why I go back to like systems change. And, I've thought about, I've been in sustainability for like 20 years. So I've been like, I was a hardcore vegan for 8 years and I am no longer. We all make our choices. And I think that, maybe there are other ways that if she is interested in being more sustainable, maybe there are other ways that you could get her on board outside of like changing something that's like, it sounds like it's kind of critical to her business. I mean, other than it's critical to her business because of price point, and I imagine if that they deliver to her. So if she's not willing to go to her neighborhood store and find something that has price parity, I don't know, maybe there's something else she's interested in, in terms of sustainability.
All right, we can do one more quick question.
Hi, have your brands been accused of greenwashing, and how do you guys address it, and what do you guys think about all the war on greenwashing and the response in green hushing that's happening at a corporate level, climate action level?
I think this question is specifically trying to address like the backlash I think if I can just enhance the question, because I think I know where this one is coming from. Is the green hushing response, are we seeing sort of a decrease in sustainability efforts because of the backlash to greenwashing? So then are the greenwashing claims sort of overused? Obviously, greenwashing is a problem, but
well, I don't run a brand, but I think you're technically the only brand. Also, just your experience with greenwashing. Have you been accused of greenwashing too?
Okay. We have been accused of it, yes. We've also put in a lot of safeguards across our brand and protections in place and standards. And also we certify to different certifications and standards to try to protect and validate and verify the work that we're doing. But it doesn't stop the accusations from coming. But we try to do what we can to try to put those, those protections in place essentially for validity, veracity, and yeah, just making sure that at the end of the day, what we're saying is truthful and not overstating, but also, not understating. I think, again, it goes back to that delicate balance. To the broader green hushing that I think we're experiencing, I think it's sad, but at the same time, I also kind of understand it. I think it's a very scary, administration that we're up against, and there's a lot of legal activity that's happening. There's a lot of really unnecessary targeting that's already going on. So I kind of understand where somebody's perspective might be like, let's fight our fights where we can instead of spending all of our dollars tied up in a legal battle. Let's maybe use our resources to focus on the work, and maybe we change the way we speak to something in this moment or what have you. I hope that it's not like a full rollback on the initiatives, although we have seen that from many companies. I think on a personal level, that's not going to age well once we're out of this administration. And I think we're even seeing that in some very big, very public brands, quarterly reports recently that have rolled back compared to some that have really stayed true and doubled down on their initiatives and what they believe is true. We can see the proof points there too. So I think if you cut through the noise and this barrage of stuff that we're all dealing with, we can actually see what's working and what's not. And I think we just all have to kind of stick together, in communities like this around what's working.
We're good? All right. That was a nice, hard-hitting question. I like to hear that. All right. Thank you. Thank you to this wonderful panel. Sorry, we're rushing along suddenly. We'll try to get back on track. It was the intermission. Anyways, thank you so much to these great panelists talking about business, very complicated, very nuanced, as they all touched on. Speaking of business, we're going to get into a really interesting conversation next. Earlier, I mentioned our theme this year, which is what does it mean to live within Earth's means? A lot of times we assume that, consumerism that we have around us is built on this foundation of unsustainable resource extraction. But life wasn't always like that. When we look back, Black and Brown Indigenous communities and ancestral ways of living, life was about being more connected, more in conversation with nature, more aware of the world around us. But we've gotten pretty far away from that as far as a general sentiment of the population goes. So the question for this next one is is it possible for human society to grow in a way where we realign with nature? And if so, what role can everyday people and businesses play in this transition? So I would love to welcome back to the stage Sanchali, who is going to host a very special fireside chat in conversation with Pat Brown, the founder of Impossible Foods and a professor at Stanford.
All right, thank you everyone for sticking with us. It's the end of the evening before we have dinner. And speaking of food, Pat, you founded Impossible Foods and launched the first Impossible Burger now 9 years ago in 2016. I'm curious to start, what about your thesis then has stayed consistent and what has changed?
Well, the original motivation is completely unchanged in terms of my mission and my thesis. That the motivation was, I realized that the use of animals as a food technology is the most destructive thing that humans have ever invented. It's by far the most destructive technology on Earth. And my motivation in founding Impossible Foods was I'm not interested in founding a company, not all that interested in food. I wanted to make that technology go away because it's, by far the biggest destroyer of natural ecosystems. It's more than 3/4 of the entire land footprint of humanity is animal agriculture. That's land that the area equivalent to North America, South America, Europe, and Australia combined that was cleared of its original ecosystems to make room for feed crops and grazing livestock. And it's eliminating it is by far the biggest opportunity to change the trajectory of global heating and so forth. So we have to make it go away. And that's the only reason that I found the company. It's exactly my motivation for pretty much everything I'm doing today. And, the strategies may have changed a bit, but that's the same thing. Now, for the company, it's somewhat different because, when I founded the company, I was very naive about the business world. And, I just thought, okay, well, I have, the way we were going to solve the problem was we're not going to tell people what they can eat and what they can't eat and hope the government's going to help us or something like that. It was basically to realize that the problem isn't that people love to eat meat and dairy products and all this sort of stuff. It's that we're using this absurd technology to produce them that, is incredibly inefficient by any metric, incredibly destructive. And when you frame it that way, well, okay, clearly we can do this a better way that's more efficient technologically and so forth. And that could be the basis of a successful business that could be good for our investors because basically if you see this through, you get a large share of a $2 trillion global industry. That's not what I was in it for, but I felt like, in order to do this kind of thing, you need to basically pander to billionaires, and that's all they care about. And the problem, what I was naive about was that eventually the fact that if you need resources, as a startup does, to fuel growth and R&D and stuff like that, you have to get it from people who basically have a lot of money. And people have a lot of money because they care a lot about money. And as soon as the investors on our board started getting nervous about the economy, their original enthusiasm about this is a long-term project, but the payoff is huge and stuff like that was like, we gotta focus on the near-term bottom line. And that was completely incompatible with, the original goals of the company. So anyway, the company is still, it's a great thing. It's still doing good things and stuff like that. But it's kind of gone from the goal of we want to totally transform this whole industry to, let's just chug along as a successful food business. And so that was a change. It wasn't a change in my goals, but it's a change in the company goals. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm trying here.
I think one thing that really sticks to me is like, you're saying that animal agriculture is one of the most destructive technologies.
The most destructive, and I'll argue with anyone who says otherwise.
So why do you say that?
Well, it's demonstrably true. You know, I would say probably the biggest threat to the future generations, to the future of humanity and the planet, is the fact that we have been sort of mindlessly destroying the natural ecosystems that keep our planet viable. Like, we sort of take nature for granted. We don't bother to try to understand it. We don't fundamentally understand seriously how any ecosystem works, believe it or not. And we've literally destroyed a large fraction of the ecosystems on Earth that have made us different from Mars, okay? That have made our planet viable for humans. And overwhelmingly, it's our use of animals for food. For aquatic ecosystems, it's overexploitation. It's pretty much entirely responsible for, you know, well, I'll just give you a metric about how bad this is from, I'm sorry I'm going on a tangent, just shut me up if I'm, but I would say it's pretty well documented that the average populations of vertebrate species, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish, across the board, all the biodiverse species on Earth, are less than a third what they were 50 years ago, okay? That's the average population of those species. And they've been tracked by a long-term study that have been looking at representative samples of biodiversity. And like I say, on average, the populations of those species are less than a third what they were 50 years ago. That's fish, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, the works. Almost certainly true of flying insects as well. And that's bad. That's vertebrate species and maybe flying insects. But the other thing that I think is important to keep in mind is those animals are integral components of the reproductive systems of the plants that are at the root of the ecosystems that are, you know, basically producing oxygen, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, purifying the water, blah, 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 all these things we take for granted. More than 80% of the flowering plants on Earth depend on birds and insects for pollination. And like I said, those populations are crashing. More than half of them depend on animals to disperse their seeds. And so I think that this population collapse is just the first step in a much broader ecosystem collapse of the ecosystems that literally make this planet different from Mars. And it's going to be very bad for future generations. And like I said, in 50 years, a factor of 3 decline in those numbers. And it's almost entirely due to our use of animals as a food technology. On land, the vast majority of the land footprint of humanity, a land area equivalent to North America, South America, Europe, and Australia combined, has been cleared of its native ecosystems to make room for grazing livestock and feed crops. In aquatic systems, it's just overexploitation, basically. And this technology is completely unnecessary because it's basically driven by the fact that nobody needs to eat animals or any animal products for optimal health. I mean, there's you know, despite the fact that all these paleo bros will tell you otherwise, that, you know, it's an incredibly well-established scientific fact that there's absolutely nothing essential or even highly valuable for human health and longevity that can only come from animals. That's total bullshit. But people love them because they love the sensory pleasures that we get from those foods and the familiarity and so forth. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, except that, you know, we've always made them by using animals, and it's completely unnecessary. So that one thing that I would say that is the most meaningful accomplishment of Impossible Foods to date, as far as I'm concerned, is that we have proven that from a technical standpoint, it's possible to make meat from plant ingredients that outperforms animal products in deliciousness, in blind taste tests, beats, beef, pork, and chicken, blind taste test beats the animal product. You can look it up. Nutritionally superior, and so forth. It's doable. We haven't done it. We haven't succeeded in our long-term mission, but it's completely doable. And we can completely eliminate our dependence on the most destructive technology on Earth. From a technology standpoint, it's doable. And so there's that. Then I'll talk about climate, okay? I published a paper on this a couple of years ago with a colleague of mine at Berkeley, Mike Eisen. We did something that amazingly had never been done, which is we took data from public sources, UN Food and Agriculture Organization, and NOAA, and climate data, and we just did a simple modeling. It was like simple math to look at what would happen if we phased out animal agriculture over the next 15 years, okay? It hadn't been done because even though it was trivial to do, people just said, nah, that's never gonna happen. It's not even worth the trouble of modeling it. Well, it turns out that if you could do that, because the emissions from animal agriculture, the entire history of that industry, all the greenhouse gas emissions are completely reversible, unlike fossil fuel emissions. You can't turn CO2 back into coal. But you can turn CO2 back into plants, okay? And methane and nitrous oxide, which are potent greenhouse gases that, animal agriculture is or one of the major contributors to, when you emit them, unlike fossil fuel emissions, you're just not stuck with them in the atmosphere. They immediately start to decay. When you turn off the spigot, you get negative emissions. Anyway, the emissions from land clearing from animal agriculture are about equivalent to half of all fossil fuel emissions in history. 800 gigatons of CO2 was released into the atmosphere by clearing the land for animal agriculture. And we can get it all back, okay? If we eliminate our dependence on animals for food, we can allow the biomass on those ecosystems to recover, and the negative emissions from methane and nitrous oxide decay, you add those things all together. And if we did that one thing, we phased out animal agriculture for the next 15 years, which I think is completely doable, the negative emissions would offset all predicted greenhouse gas emissions from all other sources, even if they continue on their current ridiculous trajectory, which let's hope they don't, but even if they did, would get us to net zero for a period of 30 years. Within a decade and a half, we could stop adding to the problem of global eating just by that one action, okay?
So just want to stop you for a second.
Yeah.
That one action is like a pretty big action, like eliminating all of animal agriculture, right?
Of course.
People say, we've always eaten meat. We are humans, we hunt. People say that. Maybe the paleo bros say that. That's kind of like a radical, coming back to radical imagination, like that's kind of a radical act of imagination to imagine this thing we've always done, eating meat, we could just not do it anymore.
No, that's the wrong way to frame it. The problem, people don't have to stop eating meat. We have to, it's kind of like when we replaced, for most of human history, animals were the powertrain for power transportation. Until a century ago, the state-of-the-art in mobile communications was a backpack full of carrier pigeons, okay? But we've figured out better technology that does a better job of providing the value that consumers got from those technologies, okay? And the same thing can happen with food. And this is the point I was trying to make. We've proven it's possible to make beef, pork, and chicken products that are more delicious, as judged by meat-eating consumers, than the animal products, and demonstrably superior nutritionally, and so forth. So the point is, from a consumer standpoint, and I'll ask a question. Okay, I bet most of you love to eat meat and so forth, and bless your hearts, no hard feelings and so forth. No, I totally get it. I mean, and most of the people I love eat meat, so it's fine. But how many of you think part of the value proposition that you get from meat is the fact that it came from the carcass of an animal that lived a miserable life? Seriously, raise your hand. Okay, so the point is, if you could deliver the things that you value, which is the deliciousness, the familiarity, the whole experience of eating it, the new protein, the iron, the micronutrients, blah, 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 and bypass the animals as a technology, okay?
So like not murder animals?
Yeah, so the point is, what I'm talking about is keep making meat, keep making dairy products, keep making fish, keep all the foods that we get from animals. But just like we figured out how to replace horses as the powertrain, replace the animals as the technology for producing them, you're not asking people to, you can eat your bolognese, you can eat whatever, your steak and so forth. Your lives don't have to change. And at scale, the technology is vastly cheaper too. So it's a win-win-win for consumers. You just have to get rid of the idea. It's like 200 years ago, people thought there's no way to make a wheeled vehicle move unless you hitch it up to a horse, right? Well, that was complete bullshit. And it's the same way with the foods we get from animals today. That there's no way to make meat without using an animal. No, there is a way to make, we just haven't done it yet, but it's doable.
I think that's really powerful, is like, people think that it's really hard to change behavior. Human behavior changes all the time. None of us are behaving the same as our ancestors did 300 years ago. So our behavior has changed radically, even probably in the last few years, your behavior has changed. You're probably using different products, buying different things, loyal to different brands than you were a few years ago. So the idea that we could change the way that we, the source of the meat that we eat, I think it sounds radical, but also it's only radical because we haven't imagined it yet.
And what I would even say is you don't even need to change behavior. I mean, from a consumer standpoint, you go to the store, you buy meat or whatever. It's not your problem as long as it delivers what you care about. The changing power transportation from powered by a horse to powered by an engine or something like that. For most people who are using it, it wasn't a radical change. It was sort of a radical change, but a more radical change because you actually, experienced a different technology and so forth. But as long as it delivered what you wanted, which is it got you to where you were going, it wasn't that radical. And that's the point, is that if you ask people to make a drastic change in their behavior, you're going to lose, okay? But if you, make it a relatively minor change and it improves their quality of life, that's the only way this works, and that's doable.
Yeah, I guess it's thinking about what the person is actually buying or looking for. Is like maybe, someone's looking to have bolognese. They're not looking to have like raw meat carcass on the way to bolognese.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
I got it.
I mean, that's kind of like, this is bolognese. That's a ground-up dead cow, man. Which do you want?
I want to talk about a little bit, like the reason we're all here today is talking about what does it look like to live within the Earth's means. And we know, there's research that shows that we're not living within the Earth's means right now, especially in the US. Global Footprint Network is a nonprofit. They put out this thing about like how many Earths would it take for us to sustain life the way that we live it right now. In the US, it would take like 5 Earths to sustain the type of way that we live right now. But not always was that true. In 1970, the whole world was living within one Earth. And in certain parts of the world, people are living within one Earth. Actually, lots of parts of the world are living within less than that. So, is it possible to live differently in the US? Like, we've talked about how people don't want to be inconvenienced. Convenience is super important to the average consumer. Value is super important. People are used to living a certain way. Can we change the way that we live here in the US to be sustainable?
Well, that's a very, it's a super interesting question. I would say the single most unsustainable thing that humanity is doing is using animals in the food system. And fortunately, in that case, there's a technology solution that will reduce the total land footprint of humanity by 75%, okay? And reduce a huge amount of the stress we put on the planet in one fell swoop, and it's a technology thing. But I think the more interesting question is, like, a lot of the other things that we do that are sustainable, like people are talking about clothes. Like, fortunately, I'm not a fashionista. I'm kind of like a fashion crime. And I'm an embarrassment to my daughter, I'm not kidding. And I was just thinking when we were talking about reusing the clothes, like, this is what I wear all the time. It's got ink stains all over the place, and my shoes are falling apart. I don't care, they're perfectly fine, and so forth, and I'm not gonna win any fashion prizes. And what I think is interesting about it is that, my quality of life is just as good as someone who's got, spends $10,000 a year on their wardrobe. And I think it's true of a lot of modern life in the wealthier parts of the world that if you were to do the thought experiment and someone said, your challenge is you're going to live on. By the way, the average daily income, the median daily income on Earth, what would you guess it is? It's less than $8, okay? The median daily income, meaning half the people on Earth are living on less than $8 a day. And most of them are pretty happy, actually. I mean, some of them are living miserable lives, but I think that the incremental value you get from all that extra consumption and stuff like that, is like low single-digit % at best. And but I don't know how to solve that problem. Like, I feel like I know how to solve the most destructive technology on Earth, which is just better technology and so forth. But the interesting thing is that the fact that, in this room, like, the lowest day in your entire life in terms of your finances, you're better off than 99% of the people in the world. I think that's something worth thinking about. And I don't know how to solve that problem, but it's you're not getting that much incremental value out of, the umpteenth pair of shoes that you buy or whatever, and probably zero, actually. And now it's just a pain in the ass. What am I going to do with all these shoes?
I think one thing I think about a lot is, like, each person has something they truly care about. Like, coming back to what we talked about at the beginning, like, not everyone can solve everything. But for some people, they're like, I don't want to change my food consumption at all. And I'm not interested in that. I live with someone who has certain dietary preferences, or I have certain dietary preferences. I'm not interested in changing them. I'm not interested in trying impossible meat, whatever. Someone might say that. That same person might be super into thrifting and really interested in how to have a more circular wardrobe and excited about the thrill of the hunt and finding, like, the perfect vintage thing. That person might decide to, like, put their creative energy into that part of their lifestyle. And to me, I think that's actually really great because everyone has a different starting point. Once you do it in one place, the sort of creativity to solve the problem in a different way might infect you, and then you might decide to do it in a different part of your life too. That's how it happened for me, at least. Like, I started with food. I was really curious about the carbon footprint of my food, and I was an economics major, and I was like, does it matter if I eat meat or not? So I started tracking with an Excel spreadsheet the carbon impact of my food choices, and I was actually really surprised by the impact. It was like, when I looked at the math, I was like, oh yeah, it really matters how much meat I eat, but I don't want to be fully vegan. It's gonna make me feel, it's not worth the problem. to do that, but I can reduce my meat consumption significantly. I eat one meat meal a week, and I've done that for 15 years, and I've had 95% of the impact of someone who's fully vegetarian. I think that idea that it doesn't have to be fully binary is really powerful, and you don't have to be perfect either. No one can be. I just wonder, how do you, if we're gonna sort of leave this before asking questions, what do you tell people about how to make a difference in a way that's manageable for them?
Well, I think if they're interested, it's useful, just as you've already done the research, for people to at least have the information about people. Virtually no one, I would say, even educated people, not that the data isn't out there, and has any idea the insanely destructive impact of the use of animals as food technologies. Not on people's radar screen, but it is. And please argue with me, I welcome it, okay? It is the most destructive technology on Earth. So that information is helpful, but I think that fundamentalism is not helpful, okay? Nobody's, I'm extremely imperfect, don't let that's not going to be, that's not going to get anywhere to say, it doesn't count unless you're at 100% or something like that. But the other thing is that sometimes these problems, there is a solution that doesn't require consent or persuasion or something like that. That's just innovation. And that's what Impossible Foods was trying to do, is look, I know I'm not going to convince hardly anyone to change their diets for the good of the world, no matter how good a person they are, no matter how motivated they are and so forth. It's just human nature. It's just really, really hard to get people to, make something they see as a sacrifice. So the solution had to be figure out a way to make it work where people get everything they want, but it's just not insanely destructive and so forth. So sometimes there's those opportunities, and I think there's probably a lot of cases where there are big environmental problems where just thinking creatively about how you can solve it in a way that doesn't place huge demands on people's willingness to change is good. And absolutely, anyone who makes, I think one of the most ridiculous ideas that's out there is we're going to make cows fart less or whatever, make them emit less methane and so forth. Even if you reduced it by 20%, it would still be the most destructive, food technology on Earth. But the point is, well, it's better than nothing, okay? So good for you for doing that. If it's improving things a little bit, I mean, you need to do a hell of a lot more, but let's take what we can get. Or, you cut your meat consumption in half, or you buy a smaller car or whatever, good for you, and that's, yeah, I think you just have to applaud every little incremental bit, but also look for the cases where you can make a, step function change.
Yeah, and step function changes often start with small groups of people making changes to start. So thank you. Let's ask questions. I'm sure that was controversial enough that people have some questions.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing this new perspective for me about the animal agriculture being a technology. I think that's a really fresh way of framing this. I don't want to argue you, but I do want to hear your counter argument, because I've had conversations with people in my life about, what's gonna make a bigger impact, you cutting down meat or, taking one less flight or something like that. And I haven't had, as someone who has been plant-based and believes in that as a big impact, I haven't had the counter argument to, someone who's arguing well, we should just all be flying less or something like that. So I'd love to hear what your counter argument is to someone arguing you.
Well, I have a couple of reactions to that. Yes, I'll get directly to the comparative impact, but I think the other thing is it's kind of like one of these, like, why are you arguing about this, okay? It's not the choice that you're facing. You can either eat this burger or you can take a plane flight, okay? I would just say those are not, mutually exclusive. But if you just do the math, okay, and I published a paper, and I can send you the link if you want on this, but when you take into account the negative emissions that could be unlocked by phasing out animal agriculture, okay? In other words, not just the emissions that are directly involved in producing this, but the negative emissions that would be unlocked if you reduced it correspondingly, okay? A pound of ground beef in terms of the net global heating impact is equivalent to flying 500 miles in a jet passenger plane, okay? That's one pound of ground beef. It depends on, like, I'm not sure exactly what the comparison is, but, and the overall impact, just the ongoing impact of the emissions from animal agriculture are substantially greater than every mode of transportation combined, including airplanes, cars, buses, trains, boats, rocket ships, all combined produce less greenhouse gas emissions just on an ongoing basis than animal agriculture. So, but it's not like, okay, you got to choose one. Are you going to skip that flight or not eat the burger, whatever,
I think it is helpful to think about it at an industry level. Like, land use in agriculture is something like 20 to 25% of global emissions. The fashion industry is something like 8% of global emissions. The airline industry is something like 3% of global emissions. But when you do take a flight, the impact of that one flight tends to be like the average impact of an American living for a whole month. So it's like you take these like sort of spiky actions and they correspond to a large portion of your own personal carbon footprint. But if you think about it at an industrial level, like all of these are really critical. Like 3% lower emissions is going to have a really big impact on our global heating. But each of these choices matters, especially, I mean, not on the individual level, as, like I'm doing this by myself doesn't matter at all. But millions of us making choices together makes a huge difference. It's created an entire plant-based meat industry that's disrupted a meat industry. Like Americans are eating 19% less beef than they were 15 years ago. Those are large structural changes that change the composition of our environmental footprint, and it's not because of legislation. It's because of the ways that companies and consumers are shifting their behavior.
The other thing I think that really is under-recognized by the general public, but I think is really nature is not a decoration, It's literally responsible for keeping our biosphere viable. And nothing comes close to the impact on natural ecosystems. Nothing comes close to animal agriculture, just broadly, the use of animals in the food system. So that's something that generally people aren't, when they're saying planes versus burgers, whatever, that's, the use of animals in the food system is, to first approximation, the thing that's destroying natural ecosystems. It's also using or polluting about 1/3 of the world's water supply. So if we phase that out, we would increase the world's water supply, fresh water supply, by about 50%, okay? So there's all these other things that generally don't get involved in the conversation besides climate change, where it's the culprit, basically.
I think we're all done with this. We have one more question. Okay, time for one more question.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I come from a regenerative agriculture background. Specifically, regenerative cattle has been something I've worked in. And so I think I come from a school of thought that's a bit more, we should all be eating far less meat, but that hoofed animals are actually part of a sustainable ecosystem, probably at an incredibly higher price point, far less frequent. And I'm just curious about the inputs, the soy specifically, that Impossible uses. And from my background and understanding, it's something that I am worried about in the world and how we feed each other is these genetically modified, and I understand the role of GMOs. But in the monocultural lens, and just curious, and it's not to debate with you, I'm not trying to get in an argument. I just genuinely am really curious of how you think about that to responsibly scale what your mission is doing, but the role of soy and monocultures in the process.
Well, there was a lot there. So first of all, when people talk about regenerative agriculture, regenerative cattle, and so forth, I think the question that you have to ask is, which is the land that's grazed by cattle used to host a biodiverse ecosystem that stored a lot of carbon, okay? In aggregate globally, something like probably 15 plus years of total greenhouse gas emissions worth of carbon. And this supposedly regenerative agriculture, where there's a ton of scientific debate about it, but one thing I think you can safely say is, are we better off from a climate standpoint tearing down a forest and putting cows on it and having them do the whatever regenerative stuff? In no universe is that true. So if you say, which are we better off? Are we better off restoring the ecosystem or moving the cows around to hypothetically improve carbon sequestration? It's just no contest. So I think regenerative agriculture, frankly, is mostly, no offense to you, but I mean, it's mostly propaganda from the slaughter cartel. The soy versus beef is a really interesting one because I've just actually, with Chris and Jeremy and so forth, we've been having a lot of interesting conversations about this because we were just talking about the Amazon and Brazil and stuff like that, and all that's a big issue. But just to put a statistical grounding on this, okay? So cattle grazing right now is using about 25% of the Earth's land surface, and the data are available. And that's all land that used to hold a lot more biodiversity and carbon, et cetera. The world's soybean crop occupies less than 1% of Earth's land area, okay? It yields 7 times more nutritionally equivalent protein than all the beef produced globally. In fact, it yields more than twice as much total nutritionally equivalent protein as all the meat of all kinds produced globally. And it's grown on less than 1% of Earth's land area. And in fact, if you were to compare soybeans in terms of the protein yield, which is the main nutrient that people value from beef and also from soy, it uses about 1% the land area per unit of protein yield compared to a cow. Okay, and I can show you all the data. I mean, it's demonstrably true. So you're talking about, and the land use from an environmental standpoint is the #1 culprit, okay? You've destroyed an ecosystem and you're using the land for something. If you use it for soy, you need 1% as much land as if you're using it for a cow to produce the same amount of protein. So I'm not a huge defender of soy. The other thing to keep in mind is that 95% of the soybeans grown in the world, the reason why there's such a vast excess of protein, more than you need to meet all humanity's protein requirements just from that one crop, is because the vast majority of it, more than 95% of it, never gets eaten by humans, it's fed to pigs and chickens and cows, that actually gets turned into human consumable protein with just like, so most of the food waste in the world, people talk about food waste, and it's not like about, oh, those romaine leaves that wind up in your trash can. It's the fact that we're wasting most of the food production capacity on Earth, growing feed crops and grazing livestock that yields a pittance in terms of actual nutrient yield compared to growing crops that humans can directly consume. So, yeah, anyway, I went down a rabbit hole there, sorry, but I think soy gets unfairly vilified. Tearing down the Amazon to plant soy, that's a bad thing, but that's not bad. That's not the soy's fault. That's the friggin' pigs in China, okay, that the soy is being grown for. And otherwise, other than that, it's a very efficient crop for producing a lot of nutritional value for people. And like I say, you can grow a lot of other crops that are just as good, but that's that. Sorry, okay.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here with us. Thank you everyone for the engaged questions. And I'm gonna pass back to Kestrel to wrap us up for the evening. And hopefully everyone will get a delicious plant-based dinner here later tonight.
Sorry about going on.
Thank you so much for that very intriguing conversation. I want to thank you all for being here, for wanting to spend the afternoon to the evening with us, for caring, because I think oftentimes today I'm kind of sad feeling like I don't feel like people care. But when you come into community spaces like this, it's very apparent that many people do care. And many people are doing their own little pieces of this really big puzzle. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Rivian for hosting us in this wonderful space and all the incredible sponsors. And as Sanchali mentioned, let's take this time to continue the conversation, continue getting into the deeper layers and the nuance over a wonderful vegan dinner provided by Good Eggs. Thank you all.